no girl could satisfy the Alpha King's desire until he woke up beside the Omega girl. The council had been meeting since 9 in the morning and had not resolved anything useful by 2 in the afternoon. This was not unusual. These particular kinds of meetings, the ones assembled not because of a specific emergency, but because of the slow, steady accumulation of ongoing concerns that required regular acknowledgement, tended to run long and end without much being settled. Elder Gareth had been navigating councils like this for 30 years. Damien had been enduring them for 8. Both men had learned that the format was the format. They covered the eastern border tax adjustment, which was overdue and straightforward. They covered the southern supply route, which was functioning but needed watching, given the predicted weather for the coming month. They covered 2 small requests from outer territory lords that could be handled by correspondence, and one that had been going on for 6 months, and would continue for at least another 6 regardless of what was said in this room today. And then Elder Gareth raised the succession question. He always raised it last. He had a particular expression for it, not hostile, not dramatic, just the measured, careful expression of a man who has been watching a problem go unresolved for long enough that patience and concern have merged into something that looks a great deal like quiet determination. The grand winter gathering is in 3 weeks, Gareth said. He slid a single page across the table. I have revised the introduction schedule. 3 private meetings per day over the first 4 days. Every woman on this list is suitable by every relevant standard. I am asking you to approach it seriously. Damien looked at the page. He looked at it long enough to acknowledge the effort behind it, then he set it down. I will attend the gathering. I will be present, and I will give what you have put forward my genuine consideration. You said essentially the same thing before the spring meeting, Gareth said, and his voice was very even. And before the autumn exchange, and before the regional council gathering in the lower valley. On all 3 occasions, the result was the same. 11 meetings, Damien said. 11 meetings with 11 women of genuine merit, each of whom left the estate without understanding what she had failed to provide, because there was nothing she failed to provide. The elder looked at him directly. The pack draws conclusions from patterns, my king. A pattern like this one is difficult to manage through reassurance alone. What conclusions is it drawing? That you cannot be satisfied, or that you have a requirement that you yourself cannot name, which produces the same practical result for everyone waiting on the outcome. Gareth paused. A king who is sound in his governance, but appears uncertain in his personal judgment, creates a specific kind of doubt that is very difficult to dispel later, once it has taken hold. The other council members were holding themselves very still. This was a conversation between 2 people, and everyone else present understood that clearly. I will give the schedule serious consideration, Damien said again. He held Gareth's gaze. And I will tell you honestly, as I always do, that I cannot promise a specific outcome, because the outcome depends on something that is not within my power to produce on a timeline, no matter how carefully the timeline has been constructed. He paused. You would not want me to choose someone without real foundation and call it something else. A companion chosen for political convenience is a much greater long-term risk to the pack's stability than a decision that takes more time than expected. Gareth held his gaze for a long moment. He was not persuaded. He was, however, satisfied enough that the conversation had been formally acknowledged to allow it to end. He gathered his papers. The meeting concluded at 4. Damien spent the following hour in his private office, reviewing the correspondence he had not gotten to during the meeting. He was working through a report from Owen Bray at the southern boundary station when Rowan came in and said that Lady Priscilla Vane had arrived and was settled in the East guest suite. How is she? Damien asked without looking up. Composed, Rowan said. Her family sent 3 separate messages to my office over the last 2 weeks, with additional background information about her, all of it unsolicited. Damien set the report down. He looked at the window. The afternoon light was going gray above the tree line. Her father holds the Eastern Border Alliance, and has held it for 4 generations. The family's connection to this pack goes back further than most of the current council's service. Rowan paused deliberately. She is also, by every account I have gathered independently, a genuinely exceptional person. Intelligent, well-regarded, calm under difficulty. I am telling you this because I want the information clearly in your mind before this evening. I always have the information clearly in mind, Damien said. The information is never what the problem is. Rowan looked at him with the particular patience he kept available for statements like this one. Then he went to arrange the evening. The formal meeting with Lady Priscilla Vane lasted 3 hours and was conducted in the smaller of the estate's 2 formal sitting rooms, a room built for exactly this purpose, with good lighting, comfortable chairs positioned at the right angle for conversation, and a fire that had been built to exactly the right size. Priscilla Vane was everything her record said she was. She was beautiful, in a way that was genuine rather than constructed. She spoke with evident intelligence about 3 different subjects: the Eastern Territories trade situation, which showed she had done her research; the winter bird migration that passed through the ridge every year, which showed she paid attention to the actual world around her; and the history of the Pact's Northern Council expansion, which showed she had taken time to understand his specific governance. Her laugh was warm, and she didn't use it too often. Her way of listening was the kind that many people performed, and few genuinely had. She was also performing, from the first word to the last. Not dishonestly, not from calculation, the way most people perform in high-stakes situations, selecting, calibrating, offering the version of themselves that seems most likely to be what is needed. He could see the care behind every sentence. He could see the thought that had gone into every response. He could see how much this evening mattered to her, and how hard she was working to make it matter in exactly the right way. He sat across from her, and watched her be excellent, and felt the familiar, absolute absence of everything he had been hoping to find. When she stood to leave, he stood with her, and thanked her for her time, and meant it genuinely. She thanked him in return, with her chin up, and her composure intact, and she walked out. He stood at the window. Rowan came back in after a few minutes, and the conversation was the one they always had, the same essential structure with slightly different words. The door to the great hall closed with a sound that was too soft for the weight it carried. 11 women. Gareth's concerns. 3 weeks until the gathering. "She was the most accomplished woman I have ever arranged for you to meet," Rowan said. "I know," Damien said. "Her family holds the Eastern Border Alliance. 140 years of loyalty. She speaks 4 languages. She runs her father's entire estate operation. She is, by every measure, exactly what this pack needs." "I know all of that," Damien said. He walked to the long table and poured water from the stone pitcher. He drank slowly and set the glass down and looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at something when his mind is not on the object, but on something behind it. "She was performing," he said. "Most people perform when they are meeting the king. I know. I understand why it happens, and I am not criticizing her for it." He moved to the chair nearest the dying fire and sat. The embers threw orange light across the side of his face. He was a large man, broad across the shoulders, dark-eyed, with a particular quality of stillness that people who did not know him well mistook for coldness. It was not coldness. It was distance. There is a difference between the two, though most people who stood across from Damien Ashford could not find the line between them. She sat across from me for 3 hours. Every word she chose was chosen in advance. Every pause was deliberate. When she laughed, I could see the decision to laugh arrive a fraction of a second before the laugh itself did. He looked at the coals. "There is nothing wrong with her. She is extraordinary. I sat there for 3 hours and felt absolutely nothing, and I have learned to trust that." Rowan sat down. "You said that about every woman who has sat across from you in 2 years. 11 women. Yes. I am aware that 11 is a significant number. Gareth also finds it significant. He mentioned the succession question again this afternoon. He believes the pack is beginning to read the pattern as something concerning." "I know what Gareth believes," Damien said. He stood and walked back to the window. The courtyard below was white with snow, the stone lanterns throwing orange circles on the accumulation. The snow was falling faster now, heavier, with the kind of quiet determination that experienced people recognize as the beginning of something much larger. "Tell him I will attend the gathering. Tell him I will consider the schedule he prepared. Tell him I will be civil, and I will be present, and I will not waste the opportunity." He paused. "And tell him also that I will not select someone to satisfy a timeline that has a greater long-term cost than the one he is worried about." Rowan was quiet for a moment. He stood. He moved toward the door and then stopped. He turned back with the careful look of a man who has something to say and is choosing his moment. "What are you looking for?" he said. "Not what the council wants. Not what I can arrange. What you are actually looking for. The room was quiet around them. Outside, the wind was picking up, moving down from the ridge with a low sound against the stone walls. "Peace," Damien said at last. His voice was very quiet. Not quiet. "I can create quiet. Quiet is easy to find when you are the king. I mean the feeling of being in a room with someone who is not performing at me, and does not need me to perform at them. Someone who is simply, entirely themselves, without arrangement." He looked at the snow. "I want to feel something real. Just once. Something that is not managed from either direction." Rowan held his gaze for a moment. He nodded once, slowly, and went out. Damien stood alone in the cooling hall. The fire had burned to almost nothing. The room was getting cold, and he did not move to correct this. He stood at the window and pressed his fingers against the glass, and looked down at the courtyard where the snow was covering everything. The stones, the pathways, every mark the day had left. He had been governing the Northern Territories for 8 years. He had taken the position at 23, younger than any of his predecessors, and had spent the first 3 years earning authority the slow and careful way, not by claiming it, but by demonstrating, consistently, that he was capable of holding it well. He had rebuilt the Eastern Alliance. He had settled 3 border disputes. He had grown the Pact's treasury, and established a council that functioned with something approaching genuine competence. The Pact trusted him. The territory was better governed than it had been in a generation. By every external measure, his life was a clear success. And the hollow place in his chest had been there since before he could remember, unchanged by any of it. It was not sadness exactly. It was more like the feeling of standing outside a warm building on a cold night, looking through the glass at something you cannot name but recognize immediately as something that has been missing from your life for a very long time. He had tried, over the years, to close it, with work, with achievement, with the company of people who were intelligent and interesting, with evenings like tonight that he had approached with genuine hope every single time. He had been hoping for 11 evenings and nothing had changed. He stood at the window until the last ember went dark and the room went cold around him. Then he walked to his chambers, lay down on the wide silent bed, and looked at the ceiling in the dark while the snow accumulated outside, and the night went very quiet, and the hollow place in his chest sat exactly where it always sat, as patient as it always was, waiting for something he had not yet found. He thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that there must be something fundamentally different about him. Not broken exactly. He functioned perfectly well. The pack was well governed. The decisions he made were sound. The people around him were, in the main, people he respected and who respected him. His life, by any reasonable accounting, was a good one. And yet, the hollow place had been there since before he could remember. He had a single memory from childhood of sitting beside his mother in a room at dusk while she read to him, both of them quiet, and feeling for those specific minutes a kind of complete settledness, a feeling of being exactly where he was without any sense that anywhere else needed to be considered. He had been 9 years old. He did not know, at 9, that the feeling was unusual. He knew now. He had spent 22 years looking for it again, and had not found it. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, and looked at his own faint reflection, and the snow fell beyond it, and the courtyard below was silent and white and entirely undisturbed. 3 weeks until the grand winter gathering. He would attend. He would be civil. He would give Gareth's schedule the genuine consideration he had promised. He would sit across from excellent, accomplished, prepared women, and he would do his best to feel something actual, and probably he would not, and the hollow place in his chest would sit exactly where it always sat. He straightened. He went to his chambers. He undressed in the dark and lay down on the wide bed and looked at the ceiling. The snow was still falling outside. He could hear it against the shutters if he listened. That dry, barely there sound of accumulation, of the world being covered in something soft and indifferent to everything underneath it. He thought, maybe it is just this. Maybe the hollow place is mine, permanently, and the life I have built around it is as good as it is going to be. Maybe exceptional women and good governance, and a pack that trusts me is the shape of my life, and the thing I am looking for is simply not available to me. He thought this, and did not believe it entirely, and did not disbelieve it entirely, and closed his eyes, and let the night do what nights do. He slept. The bowl hit the stone floor, before Clara Voss could catch it. She had been reaching for it, Her hand was already in the air, already moving, but the shelf bracket gave way faster than she expected, and the full weight of 4 ceramic bowls came down at once. She caught 2. One struck her forearm on its way to the floor. The 4th landed on the stone flags, with a sound that rang through the supply room, and left behind a wide scatter of heavy ceramic pieces. She stood in the middle of them, with 2 intact bowls pressed against her chest, and said nothing for a few seconds, because there was nothing useful to say. The bracket had been loose for 2 months. She had submitted a written maintenance report in the 3rd week of the previous month. She had mentioned it verbally to the maintenance man who serviced the outer lodge once a week. He had said he would look at it. He had not looked at it. She had not submitted a 3rd report, because submitting a 3rd report on the same defect while the first 2 had produced nothing was, in her experience, an exercise that accomplished nothing except creating more paperwork. She was still looking at the pieces when Vera Aldis appeared in the doorway. Vera was the head of household staff at the outer lodge. She had been doing this specific job in this specific place for 14 years. She was not, at her core, a cruel person. She had started her career with something approaching real enthusiasm, and the position she occupied required genuine skill to maintain. But 14 years in the same role, with no advancement and no recognition from the PAC's main administration, had made her sharp, in the way that capable people become sharp, when nothing they do is ever seen by anyone who matters. The sharpness needed somewhere to go, and it had been going toward Clara Voss for the past 18 months. That was the good set, Vera said. Clara looked up from the floor. Her arm was aching where the falling bowl had struck it, but she didn't look at it. The shelf bracket failed. I submitted a maintenance report in the 3rd week of last month. I mentioned it to the maintenance man on his last visit. I heard you. Both incidents are documented. This was an equipment failure, not a worker error. If you pull the maintenance log. The bowl is broken, Vera said. She walked into the supply room without looking at the pieces, which meant she had to navigate around them without acknowledging them. She stood with her arms crossed. You'll replace it from your wages. Clara stopped talking. She had learned, over a year and a half, exactly which arguments with Vera Aldis were worth making, and which cost more than they gained. She crouched down and collected the pieces carefully, wrapping them in the utility cloth from the wall peg, so that no one would cut themselves on them later. She stood. She looked at Vera with the expression she had also learned over a year and a half, the one that showed nothing, and conceded nothing, but did not provoke anything either. Yes, Vera, she said. She carried the broken pieces to the outer waste bin, and came back and swept the remaining dust from the floor, and moved the 2 surviving bowls to a lower shelf, and returned to her morning inventory work. Lena Marsh found her 20 minutes later in the cold larder, working through the supply list for the week ahead. Lena was small, and had red hair, and a temper she was in a constant, and mostly successful process of managing. She was Clara's closest friend at the outer lodge, and, when Clara thought about it honestly, probably her closest friend anywhere. I heard about the bowl, Lena said, keeping her voice to the volume required by the situation. It is handled. It is not handled. She cannot legally charge you for a bracket that was reported defective. There are PAC employment standards that specifically, Lena, cover situations where equipment failure has been documented in writing, and if she processes a wages deduction, I can help you draft a formal complaint to the district administration office, and I have done it before for someone else, and it worked. Lena. Clara turned and looked at her from between 2 supply shelves. Lena stopped. Clara said, the wages deduction will be processed. I will manage it. If I file a formal complaint, there are months of difficulty in front of it, during which I still live here and work under Vera, and she is very skilled at making a person's daily existence harder without doing anything specific enough to document. She paused. I appreciate that you want to help, but the most helpful thing you can do right now is not make this more visible than it already is. Lena pressed her lips together. She looked at the supply shelves. You should not have to handle everything alone, she said. I have you, Clara said. That is not alone. Lena looked at her for a moment, then let the breath go. She went back to the kitchen. Clara turned back to the inventory. She moved through it methodically, shelf by shelf, noting what was running low and what needed to be ordered. She was good at this work. She was good at most of the work she had been given to do, not because it was simple. Some of it was quite demanding, but because she had learned early that the only reliable protection against being dismissed was to be consistently better at the job than anyone could find a reason to criticize. She was 22 years old and had been working since she was 12, and had been doing it without family support since she was 16. The settlement she had grown up in had dissolved when she was at that age, not because of any dramatic event, but in the gradual way that small, isolated communities sometimes dissolve when the circumstances that held them together shift. People scattered. Clara had gone east first, then north, then west, taking kitchen and supply work wherever it was available, staying for as long as each posting lasted, and then picking up the single bag she kept ready, and moving again. She was Omega rank. In the pack's social structure, Omega was the lowest designation, and while the system was formally governed by rules intended to prevent outright discrimination, the practical reality was that Omega workers received the outer postings, the longest shifts, the supervisors who were least interested in anyone's advancement, and the accommodation that was the farthest from the main building and the closest to the supply road. Clara had navigated all of this without complaint and without pretending it was not what it was. She simply worked. She was efficient and careful, and she made very few mistakes, and the mistakes she made she corrected without making an event of them. She had one quality that she herself barely thought about, because it was simply how she was, but that other people experienced without quite being able to explain. It was a kind of stillness, not the stillness of someone who had given up on anything, but the settled calm of a person who had found a place inside themselves that the noise around them could not reach. Rooms felt quieter when Clara was working in them. People found themselves breathing more evenly in her company without knowing why. Lena had said once, very earnestly, that sitting near Clara when things were difficult felt like sitting beside a low fire on a cold afternoon. That something about the warmth of it was both specific and impossible to explain. Clara had not known what to say to this, and had offered to make tea. On the morning following the broken bowl, Vera gathered the outer lodge staff in the main hall, and read out an announcement that had arrived by courier from the main estate. The grand winter gathering was in 3 weeks. The main estate would be hosting every pack lord in the Northern Territories and their families for a full 7 days. Additional staff from the outer postings were being requested to help manage the increased demand. Clara's name was on the list. Lena, standing beside her during the reading, grabbed her arm the instant Vera finished. "You're going to the main estate," she said, and her voice had the specific quality of someone who has decided to be pleased about something before the other person has had a chance to be uncertain. Clara looked at the posting board where the names had been put up. Her name was there, printed in clear official lettering. Clara Voss, kitchen staff, temporary posting, main estate, duration of the grand winter gathering, with a return date listed 3 weeks out. "This is an opportunity," Lena said. "People get noticed at these events. People come back from gathering postings with permanent placements." "That is true," Clara said. "Are you not excited?" Clara looked at the board for another moment. She was not entirely without feeling about it. There was something complicated moving in her chest. Not dread, but not simple excitement either. The outer lodge was difficult, and Vera was persistently unpleasant, and the work was relentless, and the wages were regularly and deliberately wrong. But it was familiar, and she had learned over 6 years of impermanent work that familiar and good were not the same thing. But familiar was safer than unknown, in specific ways she could measure. The main estate was unknown. The main estate was where the king lived, and the whole pack's central administration operated, and everything was bigger and faster, and there were more ways to fail. "I will pack this evening," she said. Lena hugged her with her whole arms. Clara let herself be hugged, and felt warmly toward Lena for the uncomplicated enthusiasm of it, even if she could not quite share it. 3 mornings later, she walked the 3 miles to the supply road in the early cold, her single bag over her shoulder, and waited for the cart. The frost was thick on the grass, and her breath was visible in the still air, and everything was quiet in the way winter mornings in the outer territories are quiet, full and clean, not empty. The cart came around the bend. She climbed up beside the driver, who said good morning, and then did not say much else, which she appreciated. The road went up over a long hill. When the cart came over the ridge, the main estate appeared below them in the early light. A large stone complex set into the tree line, its windows lit with the gold of working fires, its gates already busy with arriving supply carts and other transferring staff. Clara looked at it for a long while as the cart descended. It was larger than she had expected even from the descriptions she had heard. more solid, more serious, somehow, than the idea of it had been. She thought about the broken bowl on the supply room floor. She thought about Vera's crossed arms and flat voice. She thought about 18 months of doing everything correctly and having it count for almost nothing in the place she was doing it. She looked at the estate and thought, quietly and without any particular drama, that she hoped this posting would be different. She did not allow herself to think it would be better. Better was too large a word for a thing she had not yet seen up close. She only allowed herself to think different, which was something she could manage without expecting too much. The cart moved down the hill. Clara held her bag on her lap and watched the road and let the cold morning air sit on her face and said nothing to the driver, who said nothing back, and the gates came up ahead of them, and the estate was there, and she got down from the cart and went to find the staff entrance and begin the process of learning a new place, which was the thing she had always been best at. She had been in this part of the territory for 3 months, before she knew all the roads by name. She had been here for 6, before she knew which of the local supply merchants could be trusted to fill an order correctly, without being checked, and which needed to be verified every single time. She was good at learning places. She had learned them faster and more completely than most people, because she had needed to, and the skill had become simply part of how she moved through the world. The outer lodge had been learned in the first 2 weeks. After that, it had been 18 months of doing the work well, in a place that did not particularly notice it being done. The cart turned down the final stretch of road toward the estate gate. Clara could hear other carts ahead of them, the sound of voices, the particular busy sound of a large building, in full preparation for a significant event. The driver said nothing, and she said nothing, and the gate came up ahead of them, and 2 staff members in estate coats waved them through. Inside the gate, it was organized and fast-moving. Supply carts were being directed to the left. Arriving staff were being directed to the right, where a woman with a clipboard, and the expression of someone who had been managing this since before dawn, was going down a list rapidly and assigning people to their positions. Clara waited her turn. When the clipboard woman reached her, she gave her name and posting and was told where the kitchen entrance was, where the staff dormitory was, and what time the morning service began. She was given a key and a small card with the schedule on it. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. She went to the kitchen entrance. She found the head kitchen staff, a quiet man named Edmund who had clearly been doing this for a long time, and saw no reason to say more than was necessary. He showed her the preparation area, the storage rooms, the cold larder. He showed her where the equipment was kept and where the supply orders were logged. He said she would work the morning service starting at 6. She said she understood. She found the staff dormitory and her assigned space and put her bag down. Lena had been assigned to the same dormitory, which was the first genuinely good piece of news she had had all week. Lena arrived 20 minutes after Clara and immediately assessed everything in the room with the particular efficiency of someone who has been doing her own version of learning new places for a long time. "It is better than the outer lodge," Lena said. "Yes," Clara said. "The beds are better." "Yes. The window actually seals properly." "I noticed." Lena looked at her. "Are you going to let yourself be even a little bit glad about this?" Clara looked at the bed. It was, in fact, significantly better than the one at the outer lodge. The mattress was not thin. The blanket was not threadbare. The window did seal. She sat down on the edge of it and felt the mattress and thought about the fact that she would not, at least for the next 3 weeks, wake up cold. "Yes," she said, "I think I can manage a little glad." Lena sat down beside her and bumped her shoulder once with her own shoulder, which was the most compact version of a hug that 2 people sitting on a bed could manage. Clara bumped her back. Outside, the main estate was busy with the arrival of packlords and their families, and the beginning of the grand winter gathering, and in 3 weeks Clara would go back to the outer lodge, and Vera and the loose shelf brackets, and the incorrectly docked wages. But for now there was a bed that was not thin, and a window that sealed, and a friend who had bumped her shoulder, and Clara let herself have those things exactly as they were. She went to sleep early that night in preparation for the 6 o'clock start, and slept well, and woke ready, and went to work. The storm warning arrived 3 hours too late. By the time the message came down from the Northern Ridge weather station, a system moving faster than predicted, temperature dropping well ahead of the forecast window, significant accumulation expected inside 6 hours. The grand winter gathering was already settled into its second evening. Carriages had been unhitched, guests had unpacked, children were asleep in their assigned rooms, and fires were burning in every hearth in the main estate building. Then the wind turned from the north, and everything changed. It came down from the ridge with a sound like something being torn open, a long, low, sustained sound that hit the estate broadside and dropped the temperature by 8 degrees in less than an hour. The snow that had been falling lightly all afternoon became something sideways and serious, blowing in hard sheets against every window, piling fast against every exposed wall. Inside the estate, what Rowan Cole later described as controlled chaos began immediately. Guests who had been assigned to the outer cottages needed to be moved into the main building. Families who had arrived with light luggage for a week of indoor events suddenly needed their winter supplies retrieved from carriages that were now in a rapidly accumulating snowfield. Staff who had been managing a busy but organized gathering were now managing a busy, disorganized, and significantly colder one. Rowan had been running the guest redirection for 4 hours without a break by the time midnight arrived. He was handling it correctly, because he handled everything correctly. But he had the particular tension in his jaw that appeared when the number of moving problems exceeded the number of available solutions. Clara had been on shift since 5 in the morning. She had covered the breakfast service, which began at 6 and ran until 9. She had covered the midday service for 140 guests, which was the largest meal she had helped prepare since arriving at the main estate. She had covered the formal evening dinner, which ran 3 hours, and required a level of precision in the kitchen that left everyone involved silent and focused for most of it. And now, at 5 minutes to midnight, she was doing the supply run that Vera would have assigned to someone else at the outer lodge, but that here, at the end of a staff-exhausted night, had fallen to whoever was still standing. She had a list. She had made the list herself, because the one she had been given was incomplete, and working from an incomplete list in conditions like tonight was how things got missed and how guests went cold. She worked through the Upper West Corridor methodically, room by room, collecting and redistributing bedding and blankets for families who had moved from the cottages into the main building. The upper wing was quiet at this hour. The guests on this level had settled. The corridor ran between stone walls, lit by lanterns placed too far apart, leaving stretches of shadow between each pool of light. Her feet had stopped hurting sometime around 10 o'clock and had moved to a deeper level of tiredness that was beyond specific sensation. Her arm, where the bowl had struck it 4 days ago at the outer lodge, had started aching again in the cold. She had been awake for 19 hours. She moved through the dark corridor with the practiced steadiness of someone who has passed exhaustion and come out the other side into a kind of simple, flat endurance. She found the linen she needed in the second storage room on the Upper West Corridor. She bundled it into the basket, checked the remaining items on her list, and turned back toward the corridor. That was when she saw the key on the floor. It was lying in the center of the corridor, directly beneath one of the lanterns, which made it visible from several feet away. A single brass key on a small ring, with a small tag attached to the ring. She looked both directions down the corridor. No one. She picked it up and read the tag. Room 14. She checked the door numbers on the nearest doors. She was in the right section. Room 14 was 2 doors down on the left. She walked to it and knocked quietly. The kind of knock that would not disturb a sleeping person but would wake someone who was only resting. Nothing. She knocked once more. Nothing. She tried the handle, and it did not turn. She used the key, and the door swung open. A small, plain room. Narrow bed with a simple dark cover. A side table. A window facing north with frost beginning to form on the inside of the glass. A small fire in the grate that had been laid earlier, but had been burning without attention long enough to be low. No personal items anywhere. No travel bag, no coat. No sign that anyone had been here since the fire was first lit. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at the room. She looked at the key in her hand. She looked at the remaining items on her list. 4 more deliveries, all on the floors below. She thought about those 4 deliveries. She thought about the service stairs and the lower corridors, and the fact that she had been moving since 5 in the morning, and it was now minutes past midnight, and she had just over an hour before the night staff came on and could take over the remaining distribution. She told herself she would only sit for a moment to rest her legs. She set the basket inside the door. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. She looked at the small window and the frost on the glass. She noticed that the room had a particular quality of warmth and quiet. Not from the dying fire specifically, but something in the air itself, something faint and almost familiar, like pine sap and something softer underneath. She did not intend to lie down. She lay down. She did not intend to stay. Within 6 minutes she was asleep, the kind of sleep that takes a person so completely that the world outside simply stops existing. She did not hear the wind increase against the north face of the building. She did not hear the voices that moved through the corridor an hour later, as more displaced guests were directed through the wing by a staff member with a lantern. She did not hear anything at all. King Damien Ashford had not slept properly in 36 hours. He had managed this before, during difficult council weeks and border emergencies that required unbroken attention, and he had a good functional capacity for it. But 36 hours with only surface-level rest put a particular kind of strain on the part of his mind that was supposed to be able to let things go, and it was that part that was causing him difficulty now. He had attempted sleep at 11. He had looked at the ceiling of his chamber for 45 minutes. He had gotten up and worked on correspondence, which had engaged his attention enough to prevent him from resting, and not enough to produce anything useful. He had put the correspondence down and stood by his chamber window, and watched the snow accumulate on the courtyard below, and thought about 3 things he could not stop thinking about, all of them unsolvable at midnight. He walked. He had done this since he was a young man, moving through the estate's corridors at night, when his mind would not be still, not going anywhere specific, just moving through the familiar quiet of the sleeping building. He knew the estate completely. Every corridor, every creak in every floorboard, every draft that found its way through an imperfectly sealed window, every spot where the lanterns were always kept burning low, and every spot where the darkness was complete. Moving through it at night had always helped his mind slow down. It was the one thing that consistently worked when nothing else did. He walked for nearly an hour. He covered the main wing and the east corridor, and went down to the ground floor and checked the great hall fire, which was burning steadily. He went through the council annex and back up. He found himself in the upper west corridor without having planned to go there. This happened sometimes when he walked. He ended up somewhere his feet had carried him while his attention was somewhere else. He had not been in this section of the building in some time. It was the quieter wing, the lower priority guest rooms and the staff rest spaces, and there was nothing here that required his attention. He walked slowly down it. The lanterns were burning at their lowest level. The corridor was very still. He thought about the border reports he had read that afternoon. Hugh Mercer's pack continued to make small, careful movements along the Southern Territory line, not enough to be called aggression, but enough to require attention. 3 incidents in the previous week. Not coincidence, he thought. Something probing. He came to a stop outside room 14. He did not know why he stopped. He had been walking past it. Something pulled at him. Not a sound, not a thought. Just some quality of the air here, or the particular quiet of this spot, or something he could not identify that made his feet stop moving. He stood outside the door for a full moment. Then he tried the handle. It turned. The room was dark, only the pale gray light from the snow-bright window, which was enough to see shapes and nothing more. He stepped inside and let the door close behind him. The room smelled like warmth. He did not identify it specifically in that moment. He was too tired, and the scent was too faint, and he had been awake for too long for anything subtle to fully register. He moved to the narrow bed. He sat down and removed his outer coat, and set it on the chair and lay back, and the instant his weight was down, and the darkness was around him, and the quiet warmth of the small room was there, something in him stopped. The running thoughts stopped, the border reports stopped. The hollow, restless ache that had been sitting in the center of his chest for longer than he could specifically remember went very, very quiet. He slept. Not the thin, restless, surface-level sleep that had been all he could manage for weeks. This was something different, deep, complete, the kind of sleep that takes a person entirely out of themselves, where time does not move, and the mind does not work, and there is nothing. Just rest, absolute rest. The storm pressed against the north face of the estate and was not heard. The snow accumulated on the window ledge and was not seen. The corridor lantern outside the door burned low and then lower. Inside room 14, both of them slept. On the narrow bed, on either side of the small space between them, one person with no idea the other was there, and one with no idea of anything at all. Both of them breathing slowly, both of them still, both of them finally and entirely quiet. The storm did what storms do, and the night passed, and the snow kept falling, and the room was warm and still, and smelled of pine, and something that had no exact name but felt, in the wordless way some things feel, like belonging. Damien walked back toward the east wing eventually, but not directly. His feet carried him through the council annex, and down the small stair that opened onto the ground floor sitting corridor, and then he stopped. He was aware, standing in the low-lit corridor, of something he could not quite name, a quality of the night, or of himself in it, that was different from the familiar restlessness he usually moved through at this hour. The running thoughts had not stopped. They were still there, the border reports, the gathering obligations, the meeting with Gareth in the morning that was going to require careful handling. But beneath the running thoughts, there was something else, something that was not quite quiet but was adjacent to it, a strange, low sense of something having shifted. He stood in the corridor for a moment and tried to understand what it was. He could not. He filed it away, the way he filed things that needed more time, and he continued toward the east wing and his chambers and the ceiling he was going to look at for another hour before sleep arrived. He fell asleep faster than he had in weeks. He did not know this, of course. He was asleep. He would not know it until he woke up. But Rowan, checking the corridor at some point past 3 in the morning, out of the particular vigilance that was simply part of who he was, noticed the lamp under Damien's chamber door had gone out earlier than usual, and noted this, and went back to his own work. Clara slept through the storm. She did not hear the wind against the north face of the building reaching its worst, around 2 in the morning. She did not hear the sound of additional staff being redirected through the corridor outside her door to manage the new guest placements. She did not hear anything that happened between the moment she lay down on the narrow bed and the moment the gray light of early morning found the room. She slept with the absolute completeness of someone whose body has been waiting for this for 19 hours. And in the room that smelled of pine and warmth and the faint particular scent that would take Damien the rest of the next day to fully identify, both of them were quiet and still and entirely at rest. He thought about Priscilla Vane as he walked. He thought about her the way he sometimes thought about difficult decisions, not with regret, exactly, but with the careful, honest attention of someone who is trying to understand what had happened and why. She had been everything her record said. She had done nothing wrong. She had sat across from him and been exceptional, and he had sat across from her and felt the clean, flat absence that he had come to know better than almost anything else in his life. He wondered, not for the first time, if this was what it felt like to be beyond a certain kind of connection, if the capacity was simply not available in him for what most people found, without understanding how rare it was. He had been in governance long enough to know that certain people simply did not feel the things other people felt, and they built lives around the edges of those feelings, and the lives were functional and meaningful and not what they could have been. He wondered if he was one of those people. He walked through the council annex and came back up the service stair. He passed through the upper west corridor. He walked slowly, not going anywhere in particular, just letting the quiet of the building sit around him. The storm was at its loudest now. The north-facing windows were taking the full force of it, and the sound came through the stone walls as a low, constant pressure. Inside, everything was still. He stopped at the end of the corridor. He stood there for a moment that was neither short nor long. The lamp at the far end was burning very low. The doors were all closed. The corridor smelled of cold stone, and the faint particular scent he still had not identified. Warm, faint, like something from a long time ago. He turned and went back to his chambers. He lay down. He looked at the ceiling. He did not sleep for a long time, but when he slept, he slept. And in room 14, Clara did not dream either, or if she did, the dreams were quiet and left nothing behind. Just the rest. Just the complete and necessary rest of someone who has been moving too long without stopping, finally stopped. The storm continued all night. By morning it had done what serious storms do, left everything covered and clean and unremarkable, all the marks of the previous day buried under fresh white. The world reset in the way only snow can reset it, and the day ahead looked like a beginning. Clara's eyes opened before the rest of her was awake. Gray light, wrong ceiling, wrong angle of window. The frost pattern on the glass was on the wrong side for the room she had been assigned. Her body registered all of this before her mind had fully assembled itself. She lay completely still, not by decision, by instinct. while her brain finished processing what her senses were giving it. This was not the staff dormitory on the lower floor. This was a room she did not know. The window faced north. The fire in the small grate had burned out sometime in the night. And there was a presence on the other side of the narrow bed that was large and warm and absolutely there. She turned her head. She almost made a sound. She stopped it by pressing her lips together, with a force that would have been painful if she had been capable of registering pain at this specific moment. The man beside her was asleep. He was lying with his back partially toward her, one arm stretched out along the near edge of the mattress, his breathing slow and entirely steady, with the rhythm of someone in a genuinely deep sleep. She could see the breadth of his shoulders under his dark coat, which he had put back on at some point, or had never entirely removed. She could see his right hand resting against the mattress edge, large, still, and wearing on the second finger a ring she recognized. A heavy signet ring with a design she had seen on the official notices posted at the outer lodge, on the estate gates, on every formal document issued by the PAC's central administration. Clara Voss lay still for 9 full seconds. Then, with a level of physical care she had never applied to any action in her life, she began to ease herself toward the edge of the bed, 1 inch at a time, no sudden shifts. She kept her eyes on his breathing, steady, unchanging, not responding to her movement. She moved 1 inch, then another. She tested each shift before committing to it. Her feet found the floor. She rose, 1 ounce of weight at a time, until she was standing. She waited. He did not move. His breathing did not change. She took 1 step toward the door. Her foot hit the basket. The basket scraped across the stone floor with a sound that was, objectively speaking, not loud, but in the total quiet of room 14 at 6:15 in the morning, it was the loudest thing in the world. He woke before she could finish being horrified about it. Not gradually, not with confusion. He went from sleep to fully present in a single breath, and he turned and sat upright, with the immediacy of someone whose instincts never completely rest, and his eyes found her across the small room, with a directness that told her those instincts had spent the night on some level still working. They looked at each other across the narrow, dim room. The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds, which felt like considerably longer. Clara said the only thing her mind produced, which was not useful but was at least true: "I am very sorry." He looked at her. He looked around the room, at the window, at the basket, at her coat still on the chair, at the burned-out fire. He looked at her again. His expression was doing something that she could not read with any confidence. It was not anger. It was not alarm. It was something she might have described, if pressed, as someone in the middle of coming to a conclusion. "I apologize," she said more directly, because the first attempt had accomplished nothing. "I work in the kitchens, temporary posting from the outer lodge for the gathering. I was doing the linen distribution last night on this corridor, and I found a key on the floor outside this door, and the room appeared to be empty, and I had been on shift for 19 hours, and I sat down for a moment and clearly fell asleep, and I understand completely that this is—" She stopped herself. She was talking too quickly, and without enough control, and she never did that. She took a breath. "I will go immediately. I am very sorry." He looked at her for a moment, in which she could not tell what he was thinking. "How long have you been awake?" he said. The question was so completely unlike any response she had expected that she just answered it. "A few minutes. I woke up just now." "Did you sleep?" She looked at him. She was aware this was a strange exchange. "Yes." "Good," he said, in the quiet tone of someone reporting something that surprised him. "So did I." He said it simply, without emphasis, and yet something about the way he said it, the understated quality of it, the suggestion that this was not ordinarily true, made it land differently than it should have. She did not know what to do with it. "I am truly very sorry," she said, because she did not know what else to do. "You found a key on the floor," he said. "The room had no occupant. You were exhausted after a very long shift." He looked at her steadily. "This is a misunderstanding." "Yes." "Then it is a misunderstanding." He reached for his coat, which had shifted in the night, and settled it. He stood. He was taller than she had anticipated. She had seen him twice during the first 2 evenings of the gathering, from the back of large rooms full of people, and at that distance he had looked powerful, in the way significant people look powerful from across a crowded hall, like a figure more than a person. Up close, in a small room, In the pale early morning with no ceremony anywhere in evidence, he looked like a man who was tired and calm and was processing something quietly. "You should go now," he said, "before the corridors fill, for your own ease." She understood what he was not saying. He was giving her the opportunity to leave before anyone saw her here, before any version of this story could form. She was grateful for this, in a way that she did not try to express, because expressing it would take more time than leaving. She picked up the basket. She went to the door. Her hand was on the frame when he spoke. "What is your name?" he said. She turned. She kept her face composed. "Clara Voss. Kitchen staff, outer lodge, temporary posting." He nodded once. He said nothing more. She went out and closed the door and walked down the corridor with a controlled speed that was as fast as she could go without looking like someone fleeing, which she was, and she took the service stairs all the way to the lower floor and found her dormitory. Lena was asleep. 3 other women were asleep. The room smelled of warm breathing and lantern oil, and the particular smell of a room where several people have been sleeping for hours. Clara set her basket down. She sat on her bed. She looked at the wall across from her for a while. She reviewed what had just happened in the way she reviewed problems at work, by separating the pieces and looking at each one clearly, without allowing the overall shape to alarm her before she had examined the parts. The pieces were: she had accidentally slept in a room she was not assigned to. He had also accidentally been in the same room. They had woken up at the same time. He had been calm. He had not made it worse. He had given her a clear way out. He had asked her name. She sat with the last piece longer than the others. Then she put it aside, because the morning service started at 6 and she was already 17 minutes late, and everything that had just happened in room 14 could be a thing she thought about later, when there was time for it, which was not now. That morning and for the rest of the first day of what followed, Damien sat in the small room for several minutes after Clara had gone. He was aware, with a precision that felt almost physical, of what the last 8 hours had felt like. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed and held the memory of it the way a person holds something they don't want to lose before it fades. He had slept. Properly. Completely. He could not locate, searching back through the last 2 or 3 years, a night that had felt like this one. The complete absence of the running thoughts, the depth of the rest, the feeling of waking up genuinely replenished, rather than simply less depleted than before. He noticed the scent of the room in the morning light. He placed it now. Pine, something warm, something soft, beneath that did not have a clear name. He had smelled it last night coming into the room, and had not identified it in the dark. He identified it now. He stood. He opened the door. The corridor was empty. He walked back toward the east wing. Rowan came around the far corner and stopped when he saw him. He looked at the room number on the door behind Damien. He looked at Damien. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he was clearly having several thoughts that he was in the process of deciding whether to express. "Good morning," Damien said. "Good morning," Rowan said carefully. "You're not in your chambers." "No." "Were you in?" Rowan glanced at the room number again. "I slept," Damien said. 8 hours. Rowan looked at him with the reading expression. He studied him for a long moment. "You look different," he said. "I told you, I slept." "You actually slept, not the surface version. The real version. I have not had it in some time." Rowan was very quiet. He was putting things together, and had the look of someone who was doing so with more care than usual. "In that room," he said. "Yes." "Why were you in that room?" "I was walking. I ended up there." He paused. "Find out who was assigned to room 14. Rowan looked at the door one more time. Was there someone assigned to it? "Find out," Damien said, and went back to his chambers. Rowan stood in the corridor for a full minute after he left. He looked at room 14. He thought about several things, none of which he voiced out loud, because there was no one there to voice them to. Then he went to find the room assignment records. He found the answer within an hour, and brought it to Damien's office that afternoon. Clara Voss, kitchen staff, outer lodge, temporary posting. The key for room 14 had been checked out to a visiting family's senior attendant who had misplaced it early in the evening and reported it missing to the front desk just after midnight. Damien read the report. He looked at Rowan. He said, "What else do you know about her?" Rowan looked back at him, with the expression he kept available for conversations that were heading somewhere he had not quite expected. "I can find out more," he said. "Do that," Damien said, and went back to work. He went back to work. He had a full day of gathering obligations, a meeting with 2 of the visiting pack lords in the late morning, the midday formal event, and a council session at 4 that would run at least 2 hours. He attended all of it. He was present and attentive and managed every conversation with the same quality of focus he always brought to the work that mattered. But underneath all of it, in the quiet space below the running calendar of the day, something was different. He could not name it specifically. He would not have tried, in the middle of a gathering day, to name it specifically. He simply moved through the day, aware that something had changed overnight, and that the change had not left him when he woke up. At the end of the midday formal event, he saw Clara across the large hall. She was moving through the staff corridor with a tray, focused on the path ahead, and she did not look up. He watched her for a moment, the particular quality of how she moved, neither hurried nor slow, the same quality he had noticed in the kitchen. Then the conversation he was in required his attention, and he turned back to it. But he had seen her. The council session at 4 covered the border situation in the south, which required real attention, and 3 minor administrative matters that did not. Gareth raised the introduction schedule briefly at the end. Damien told him the schedule would continue as planned for the remainder of the gathering. Gareth looked satisfied enough to leave it there. After the session, Rowan came to his office with the file he had requested. Damien read it. He read it a second time. He set it down. He thought about 2 wages deductions for documented equipment failures. He thought about 18 months at an outer posting, with no advancement evaluation, and no documented reason. He thought about the word efficient appearing in 3 separate supervisor records, the way a word appears when it is all anyone can think of to say, and nothing else about the person has been noticed. He thought about someone who had found a key on a corridor floor and picked it up and knocked again, and then used the key because the room was empty and she was exhausted, and 18 months of diligent work had produced exactly this: a night linen run at midnight after 19 hours on shift, alone in a quiet corridor, finding a key someone else had dropped. He sat in his office for a while after Rowan left, not reading anything, not doing anything, just sitting with that. Then he said to himself, quietly and with the particular clarity he brought to things that were actually clear, "I want to speak with her," and he went about finding a way to do it. He thought, as he walked back toward his chambers that evening, about what it meant that the day had produced this, a morning that was strange and unexplained, a file with a single sheet of paper, and the particular quality of standing in a kitchen doorway watching someone go back to work after 2 words. He thought about all the formal meetings, and the careful arrangements, and the lists and the schedules. He thought about what 11 of those had produced, which was nothing, not because the women were wrong, they were excellent, but because the approach was wrong. Arranged meetings between people who were performing for each other in rooms designed for exactly that kind of performance. He thought about room 14, which had been arranged by nobody, for no purpose, and had produced the first real sleep he'd had in months. He thought about the kitchen this morning, which had not been arranged for anything except the preparation of lunch, and which had produced the only thank you he had received in a very long time that had not been calculated. He went to his chambers. He changed out of his formal coat and put on something simpler, and sat by the window and watched the gathering guests moving in the courtyard below. Pack lords and their families, their children playing in the remaining snow, the servants of 6 great houses moving between the cottages and the main building. It was a successful gathering, by every measure his counsel would apply. The meetings had gone well, the relationships had been maintained. Elder Gareth's introduction schedule was producing the social outcomes it was designed to produce, for everyone except the one person whose participation in it actually mattered. Damien watched the courtyard and was quiet. He thought, what am I going to do? He did not have an answer yet. He was not a man who forced answers before they were ready. But the question was there, and it was genuine, and it had a quality of urgency that the previous 11 similar questions had not had. Those had been questions about whether a specific person might be the right one. This was a question about whether he was going to do something about what he already knew. He sat at the window until dinner, and went to dinner, and was present and civil, and came back to his rooms, and found Rowan's note on his desk, and read it, and understood that Clara Voss had already answered the question for herself. He read the note one more time. Then he set it down and sat for a long time, thinking, and by the time he went to bed he knew what he was going to do, even if he did not yet know exactly how. The file was a single page, and Rowan had written it himself. He set it on Damien's desk the following afternoon. Most things that came across this desk arrived in bound folders, annotated with cross-references and supporting documentation, because most things that mattered enough to be reviewed were complex enough to require it. A single handwritten page was a different kind of document. It was the kind of document you produced when the subject was simple enough that complexity would only obscure it, or when you wanted the person reading it to notice what was not there. Damien read it without speaking. Rowan stood across the desk and waited. Name, Clara Voss. Age, 22. Pack rank, Omega. Current posting, Outer Lodge, kitchen staff. Temporary transfer to main estate, for the duration of the winter gathering. Previous postings, 4, all in outer territories, each lasting between 12 and 18 months. Family connections within the pack, none listed. Point of origin, independent settlement east of the Lower Valley, formally dissolved 6 years ago. Self-directed education, work record across all postings, consistently rated efficient and reliable, no disciplinary record. Current Outer Lodge supervisor, Vera Aldis. Supervisor's record of wages deductions against Clara Voss in the previous 6 months. 2. Damien looked up from the page. The deductions. Both incidents documented as equipment failure in the maintenance records, Rowan said. Shelf bracket failure in the first case, a cartwheel defect in the second. Both were flagged for repair by staff before the incidents occurred. Both repair requests are in the maintenance log. He paused. The equipment records support her account. Both times. Damien set the page down carefully. He straightened it against the desk with 2 fingers, which was something he did when information settled in him, in a way he was not immediately ready to respond to. No documented reason for the Outer Lodge placement. None. She came to this pack 18 months ago, and was assigned to the Outer Lodge on her first day, with no note explaining why. It is possible it was a clerical error. It is equally possible that someone in initial processing saw Omega rank, and assigned the most available outer posting, without thinking about it further. Rowan paused. She has spent 18 months, doing consistently above-average work, in a posting that most senior staff in the Outer Lodge consider an afterthought, under a supervisor who has twice charged her wages for problems that were not hers. Damien looked at the window. Outside, the last of the gathering's second day was settling into early evening, the light going gray and cold. In the courtyard below, a group of children from one of the Lord families was throwing snow at each other, in the particular joyful, uninhibited way that children throw snow when they have been cooped up indoors for most of a day. "I want to see her work," he said. "Not formally. I don't want her to know I'm there. I just want to see her at work." Rowan looked at him with the careful expression, not the one he used for political concern, but the quieter one he used when something was developing that he was not yet sure how to evaluate. "The kitchen staff moves to lunch preparation around 10 in the morning," he said. "The east service corridor passes the main kitchen entrance. You can see most of the prep area from the far end." Damien arrived at 10 past 10. He stood near the stone column at the far end of the east corridor, which gave him a view through the kitchen entrance of the full length of the main preparation table. There were 6 staff visible. He found Clara in less than a minute. She was at the far end of the table, working through a large crate of root vegetables, cleaning and sorting them with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done the task enough times that her hands know it without her attention. Her attention was divided between the work and a quiet conversation with the red-haired woman beside her, Lena Marsh, according to the file, the person listed as her closest colleague at the Outer Lodge. The conversation was unhurried, the kind of talk that happens between people who are comfortable enough with each other that words do not have to fill every space. He watched her for a while. He watched how she moved. Not hurried, not slow, nothing wasted. He watched her say something to the red-haired woman that made the woman laugh, and Clara smiled at the response, without looking up from the vegetables, and the smile was completely unmanaged. There was no audience for it. It was simply the expression of someone who is comfortable and in the company of someone they trust, saying something they actually found funny. It came and went in a few seconds, and she returned to the vegetables, and nothing about it was arranged for anyone. He was still watching when Lord Calder's cousin appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had encountered this young man twice already during the gathering, once at the opening evening when he had said something dismissive about the seating arrangements to a staff member who could not respond, and once at yesterday's midday meal when he had sent a dish back 3 times for changes that were not improvements. He was not, Damien thought, a bad person. He was a person who had grown up understanding that his family name was a license to require accommodation, and he had never been required to examine this understanding. He pointed at Clara from the doorway. You. The wrong wine came up last night. That was your responsibility. Clara looked up from the vegetables. Her expression did not shift. I brought what the service request list specified, she said. If the request itself contained an error, that would have originated with the event staff. I'm telling you it was wrong. I can confirm what was listed on the request, if that would help clarify things. I don't want you to confirm anything. I want you to admit you made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake, Clara said, with the same even tone as before, and no more heat than she had used to describe the weather. But I'll speak to the event staff, and make sure tonight's service is correct. Is there anything specific you'd like me to note for this evening? The young man stared at her. He had arrived expecting either submission or defensiveness, and had received neither. He had received competence and a practical solution, offered without sarcasm, and this was somehow more frustrating than either of the things he had prepared a response for. Look at me when I'm talking to you, he said. The kitchen went very quiet. Clara looked up at him. She met his eyes directly, and held them, and waited, without expression, without apology, without any visible anxiety at all. Do you know who I am? He said. You are Lord Calder's cousin, Clara said, a guest of this estate. I am treating you as such. You should. Is there a specific request I can pass along? She said. A wine preference for this evening. A dietary consideration. Anything I can note and relay to the appropriate person? If so, I'm very glad to help. If not, I'm in the middle of preparing lunch for 140 guests. He opened his mouth. He looked past her into the kitchen, and his expression changed. Damien had stepped into the doorway. He had not planned to. He had simply moved when he heard, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," because that was a sentence he did not intend to hear twice inside his own estate from anyone to anyone. He stood in the kitchen entrance, and looked at Calder's cousin, with the expression that he had developed over 8 years of leadership, not threatening, not performed, simply the full and entirely steady presence of a person who holds all the authority in the room, and has no need to announce it. The young man's face went through several things in approximately 2 seconds. My king, he straightened. I was just... The event staff office is in the south corridor, Damien said. They manage all service questions for the gathering. They'll be happy to help you. The young man nodded rapidly and left. The kitchen sound resumed, slightly slower than before. Damien looked at Clara. She looked back at him with an expression that was not quite alarm. She had a better grip on herself than that, and not quite the composed blankness she had been showing Calder's cousin. It was something between them. The specific expression of someone who has just stepped into a much more complicated situation than the one they were in 30 seconds ago, and is doing a very fast inventory of what to do about it. Thank you, she said. Her voice was even. He was in the wrong, Damien said. She nodded once. She looked back at the vegetables. He stood in the doorway for another moment, aware that he was doing it, not entirely clear on why, and then walked back to where Rowan was waiting at the far end of the corridor. She was fine, Rowan said. She would have managed it without you. I know, Damien said. They walked. She didn't perform for me afterward. She was managing a difficult person, and then you appeared. She didn't have time to perform. That is not what I mean. He paused. When she saw it was me who had intervened, there was no shift, no recalibration. She said thank you, and looked at the vegetables. 11 women have sat across from me in formal introductions, and every single one of them, the moment they were aware of my attention, changed how they were presenting themselves. She did not change at all. He paused again. She just said thank you, and went back to her work. Rowan walked beside him, and was quiet for 3 paces. Then Damien. I know. She is Omega-ranked kitchen staff, with no family standing, and no connections of any kind, in this pack structure. I know that. The council has 2 more introductions scheduled. Lady Helena Croft arrives tomorrow. Her family holds the Northern Lake territory. I will meet Lady Helena, Damien said. I will sit across from her for however long is required. I will be present, and I will be civil, and I will give it genuine attention. He paused. And I will come back having felt nothing, and we will have this conversation again, but I will go. He went. He sat across from Lady Helena Croft that evening for 3 hours. She was warm and intelligent, and spoke about the Northern Lake Territory's history with evident knowledge and real feeling. She had a genuine laugh, and asked questions that showed she was actually listening to his answers. She was, in every way that could be observed and measured, an excellent companion for the evening. He felt nothing. He walked back to his chambers at 10 that night, and found Rowan's note on the desk, as he always found Rowan's notes, because Rowan had been leaving notes about things he thought Damien should see before morning for 6 years. This note said, Clara Voss has submitted a formal transfer request back to the Outer Lodge, effective after the gathering ends. He read it twice. He set it down. He sat in the chair behind his desk and looked at the window, where the snow was still falling outside, and was quiet for a long time. She had done the most sensible possible thing. She had decided, after a single corridor encounter, in which he had said almost nothing, that the most practical response to a king who had noticed her was to put as much distance between them as available logistics allowed. No drama, no complaint. Just the calm, practical self-protection of someone who has learned to be very careful about what she allows herself to be exposed to. He understood the logic completely. He understood it well enough that he could have written the reasoning himself. And sitting at his desk with the note in his hand and the snow falling outside, and the hollow place in his chest, sitting exactly where it always sat, he felt something shift, something quiet and small and entirely certain, in the direction of a woman who had thanked him for defending her and gone back to her work. He stayed at his desk. He put out his lamp. He sat in the dark for a while with the window above him showing the pale purple-gray of a very late winter night, and the note from Rowan on the desk that he had read twice and set down. He thought about what the note meant in practical terms. It meant that the situation had not been created by Clara Voss. She had not seen an opportunity and moved toward it. She had seen a complication and moved away from it. She had done this calmly, promptly, and without drama, which was consistent with everything else he had learned about her in the previous 5 days. He thought about all the things the note was not. It was not an opening. It was not an invitation. It was not a sign that she was interested in his attention or curious about what it might become. It was the opposite of all of those things. It was a door being closed. He sat with that for a while. He was 31 years old and had been governing one of the most significant territories in the region since he was 23. He had made decisions that were hard and that were right and that had cost him things, and he had made them without flinching, because flinching from the cost of the right decision was not something he permitted himself. He had also, in 8 years of governance, never once made a personal decision that he allowed to be driven by what he wanted rather than what was correct. He sat in the dark and thought about this too. He thought, what is correct here? What is the right thing? The right thing, he thought, is not to countermand a transfer request made by someone who is protecting themselves from something they have every rational reason to be cautious about. The right thing is not to use his authority to prevent someone from making the choice that is safest for them. But the right thing was also, possibly, to find out whether what he had found in the last 5 days was what he thought it was. And if it was what he thought it was, then doing nothing about it was its own kind of failure. He sat with that. He sat with all of it. Then he got up and went to bed. In the morning, there was a border report on his desk that required his full attention, and he gave it his full attention. And when the full attention was done, he had his answer. He was going to the border lodge. And whatever came of that, whatever the situation was when he arrived there, he was going to find out what he was dealing with. He went to find Rowan. At 7:22 in the morning, the east service corridor that connected the kitchen to the upper linen room was empty. At 7:30, it was still empty. At 7:38, Clara appeared at the far end of it. She was moving with the basket under one arm, her attention on the path ahead in the way it was when she was going through the day's sequence in her mind. She was 20 feet into the corridor before she looked up and saw him standing at the near end of it. She stopped walking. The expression that moved across her face lasted approximately 1 second. Recognition, rapid assessment, a specific kind of internal recalibration. And then it was gone, and she was simply standing in the corridor holding a linen basket. He watched her make a decision. He could see it happen, the small shift in her weight, the slight change in her angle, as she turned toward the side hallway on her right. It was a parallel route, longer, but it reached the same destination. He had not known she knew about it, but she clearly did, and she was clearly using it. He moved, not quickly, not urgently, but with the deliberate pace of someone who has made a decision and is following through on it, and she heard his footsteps, and stopped, and turned to face him before he reached her. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who has made herself very steady, on very short notice. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, my king." Her voice was level. "I would like to speak with you, if you have a moment." She held the basket in both hands. Of course. He had not prepared specific language for this, because prepared language was performance, and he had enough of that in his life. He said, "I wanted to apologize for the morning in room 14. The situation was as much a product of my actions as yours. I came into a room in the dark, without checking whether it was occupied. You were more startled than I was when we woke up, and that part is mine to own." She blinked. This was clearly not what she had expected him to say. "You don't need to apologize." "I think I do. I was in a room I wasn't assigned to." "You found a key on the floor. The room appeared empty. You were at the end of a 19-hour shift." He looked at her. "I walked into it in the dark without checking. The more careless action was mine." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is a very generous interpretation. It is an accurate one." He studied her face in the corridor light. She had a quality that he noticed again now, a complete settledness about her. The look of someone who is fully where they are, and not simultaneously somewhere else. He had been in meetings with council members and pack lords who had that quality, and many who did not, and it was always immediately apparent which was which. "How long have you been posted with this pack?" 18 months. "All of it at the outer lodge?" "Yes." Something in the flatness of her answer. Not complaint, just fact. The tone of a person who has made their peace with something, without being required to pretend they like it, settled in him uncomfortably. That is a long time for an initial posting, for someone without a documented reason to be held there. "Omega rank has limited placement options," she said simply. "Not this limited. Not for this long." She looked at him for a moment, and when she spoke again her voice was a little more direct. "What is it you wanted to speak with me about?" He had been going around it. She had noticed and said so, efficiently and without rudeness. He stopped going around it. "I want to understand who you are," he said. The air in the corridor changed. She did not move, but something behind her expression did. A small, careful repositioning. "I think," she said, very quietly and very clearly, "that I should probably not be something you're curious about." 6 words, spoken without heat or sharpness or performance of any kind, and they stopped him as effectively as a hand on his chest. He said, after a moment, "Why do you say that?" She looked at him directly. Not a challenge, just honesty. "Because you are a king, and I am an Omega kitchen worker, and those two things represent a gap that is wide enough that good intentions on one side cannot make it equal. When people with significant power take sudden interest in people who have no power to decline that interest, it rarely ends well for the person on the lower side, not because the powerful person is necessarily unkind, but because the imbalance is too large to be managed by intention alone, no matter how genuine the intention is." She paused. "I can't refuse your attention if you choose to give it, and I don't want to end this posting in a situation that is complicated or uncomfortable in ways I didn't choose, so I am asking you, respectfully, whether there is something specific I can help you with." He stood very still. He had been spoken to honestly in this building before. Rowan was consistently honest with him. His former head of council, before retirement, had been forthright to the point of occasional discomfort. He valued honesty and had gone out of his way to cultivate it in the people around him, precisely because people in his position rarely received it unprompted. But he had never been spoken to like this, not with this specific combination of complete clarity and complete absence of any interest in the effect the clarity was having. She was not angry. She was not making a point. She was describing the actual situation from where she actually stood in it. and offering him the chance to respond with the same basic honesty she had extended. He was quiet for long enough that she shifted the basket slightly under her arm. "Thank you," he said, "for saying that directly." She nodded. "I will think about what you said." "I appreciate that." She held his gaze. "Is there anything else?" "No. That is all. Thank you for your time." She inclined her head, a small, composed acknowledgement, and moved past him down the corridor. He turned and watched her go, and she did not look back, and he stood in the empty corridor long after she had turned the corner. The formal dinner that evening was held in the main hall with 42 guests. Lady Helena Croft was seated to his left again, which Gareth had arranged, and she was gracious and warm, and continued to be exactly as excellent as she had been the previous evening. She spoke about her family's involvement in the Northern Lake Territory's irrigation project, which was genuinely interesting. She asked him about the border situation with Mercer's pack with real attention. She was present, engaged, and entirely prepared. He was polite. He asked the right questions. He responded at the right moments. Rowan, seated further down the table, watched him throughout the meal, with the expression of a man who is gathering information he has not been given directly. Damien came back to his chambers at 10 and sat at his desk. He had 3 pieces of correspondence to review. He read the first one twice and retained nothing from it. He set it down. He thought about the corridor. He thought about 6 words that had been spoken with the particular quality of something that has been thought through clearly and said without fear. He thought about the way she had looked at him while she said them, not performing courage, just being honest, because honesty was apparently simply how she operated. He thought about what it meant that her description of the situation had been, from her side of it, entirely correct. He was still sitting at his desk when he found Rowan's second note of the day, which had been placed under the first piece of correspondence, so he would not miss it. It said, in Rowan's neat handwriting, "The transfer request has been formally processed. Clara Voss will return to the outer lodge the day after the gathering concludes." He read it. He read it a second time. He set it down flat on the desk. She had not waited. She had put in the request the same day as their corridor conversation, or possibly even before it, and it had now been formally approved, which meant within a few days she would be 3 miles away at the outer lodge, back under Vera Aldis's supervision, with her wages being incorrectly deducted and the maintenance reports going unread. He understood why. He had understood it the moment Rowan told him about the first request. She had looked at a set of circumstances and made the most rational decision available to her, and the rational decision was to leave before anything complicated had time to develop. He also understood that the rational decision was, in her situation, the only safe one, and that she should not have to be in a situation where safe and rational pointed in the same direction as away. He sat at his desk for a long time after that. He did not pick up the correspondence. He did not send for Rowan. He sat and was quiet, and thought about a woman who had no interest in his attention, and was, therefore, the only person in 3 weeks who had given him something that felt real. He went to bed late. He lay in the dark. He thought about the hollow place in his chest, and about room 14, and about the specific sound of 6 honest words in a corridor, and he slept badly for the first time since the night he had slept well. He had been here before, not literally, but in the essential shape of the thing. He had been at a desk at 10 in the evening, understanding something he did not want to fully understand, with the right answer, and the uncomfortable answer pointing in the same direction. He had governed this territory for 8 years, by following the right answer, even when it was uncomfortable. He was aware that this was different from the governance decisions. He was aware that the stakes were different, and the audience was different, and the cost, whatever it turned out to be, would be paid in a currency that had nothing to do with policy. He was also aware, sitting there with the note from Rowan under his fingers, that Clara Voss had done the most rational thing available to her, and that the rational thing was to leave, and that this meant he had to make a choice about whether he was going to let the most rational thing available to her be what happened next. He thought about this for a long time. He thought about performance, about the specific, chronic exhaustion of being in rooms where every person present, including himself, was doing something slightly other than simply being themselves. He had grown up inside that particular exhaustion. He had become very good at performing, and had received all kinds of things for being good at it: authority, respect, a pack that trusted his governance, 11 women who had sat across from him and done their best. He had all of it, and the hollow place in his chest was unchanged. He thought about a corridor at 7:38 in the morning, and 6 words that had been spoken without arrangement by someone who had no reason to manage what they said to him, and every practical reason to be something other than completely honest. He thought about the scent of a room that smelled like pine and warmth. He sat at his desk for a long time. Eventually he put out the lamp. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and the estate was quiet around him, and the snow outside had finally stopped, and the sky beyond the window was the deep, clear black of a genuinely cold night. He thought, there is something I need to do. He did not think it with urgency. He thought it with the particular clarity that comes when a decision has been fully made, not the restless urgency of deciding, but the clean stillness of having decided. Something in the calculation had settled. The hollow place in his chest was exactly where it always was, but for the first time in a long time, he was not looking away from it. He was looking at it directly. And he knew, with the same quality of certainty he brought to every other significant decision he had made in 8 years of governance, what he was going to do about it. He fell asleep before midnight for the first time in weeks, and the sleep was thin but pointed in the right direction, and in the morning, he was going to go to work. There was a practical element to this that he recognized clearly. He was a king who had made 11 attempts in 2 years through every formal channel available to him, and he had not found what he was looking for. And now he had found something. Not through any arrangement, not on any schedule, not in any room that had been prepared for the purpose, in the least likely possible place, with the least likely possible person, and the finding of it did not feel like 11 evenings at formal tables. It felt like something completely different. He understood the difference, the way he understood most things, clearly, and without the comfort of ambiguity to soften it. What he did not understand yet was what to do about it. He had sent the clearest possible signal to himself by learning that she had requested a transfer back to the outer lodge, that a person who had noticed his attention had concluded, sensibly, that the safest response was distance. He could not argue with the reasoning. He would have made the same calculation if their positions were reversed. But he was also aware, in the still and direct way he was aware of things that were true, that the hollow place in his chest had not stirred once in 11 careful evenings with 11 accomplished women, and that it had stirred on the night he had slept beside someone who didn't know he was there. He sat with that. He let it be what it was. And in the morning he got up, and 3 days later the border report arrived, and his path forward became, in a way he had not expected but which in retrospect he would recognize as clarifying, very clear. The border report arrived at 2 in the morning, and Rowan was at Damien's chamber door by 2:15. 3 knocks, close together, at that hour. It was the signal they had agreed on years ago for things that could not wait. Damien was awake before the 3rd knock landed. He had always had this quality in his sleep, the ability to surface completely and without fog, from whatever depth he had reached, the instant something required it. He read the report standing at his window. Owen Bray, his captain at the southern boundary station, had sent 2 riders back-to-back with a 20-minute gap between them. The first carried a preliminary alert, the second carried an update. Hugh Mercer's pack had moved. Not a dramatic incursion, not an act of open aggression, but 3 hunting parties crossing the territory boundary in the same 12-hour window, each one claiming to pursue prey, each one going deeper into Damien's land before being turned around by Owen's patrols. 3 crossings in 12 hours was not coincidence. It was a message dressed as a mistake. "He's testing," Damien said, without looking up from the page. Owen's reading also. Rowan stood in the center of the room, fully dressed. He had been awake when the riders arrived. He was often awake when the riders arrived. He's watching to see how fast you move, how firm the line is, and he chose this week deliberately, while you're managing the gathering, and your attention is divided. "If I send a large force, it reads as panic," Damien said. "If I do nothing, it reads as softness." He set the report down. "I go myself. Small group, 8 riders, visible, but not escalating. My thinking exactly. We leave at dawn. Tell Gareth before we go. Tell him the gathering obligations are suspended. He can manage the remaining guest relations." Rowan nodded. He moved to go, then paused. "The transfer request was processed yesterday," he said. "I know. Clara Voss leaves for the outer lodge via the western supply route in 2 days. The western route passes through the border lodge." The room was quiet for a moment. Damien looked at his beta across the room. Rowan looked back at him with a face that was, in the lamplight, entirely, perfectly blank. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Damien said. "I have told you everything I know," Rowan said pleasantly, and went to arrange the horses. The ride to the southern border station took the better part of the day. They traveled fast and light. Damien, Rowan, Owen's liaison, and 5 riders, and arrived as the light was fading and the cold was coming in hard from the northern ridge. Owen met them at the outer gate with a verbal update before they had dismounted. Since the previous night's report, the boundary had been quiet. No further crossings, no new movement. Which was, they all understood, its own kind of communication. Mercer knew they were coming. He had pushed, found the push noticed and responded to, and had gone still to watch what came next. The border lodge was nothing like the main estate. Low stone ceilings, thick walls, plain furniture, fireplaces that were adequate rather than elegant, corridors that were narrow and practical. Damien had always found something restful about it, a place stripped of the formality that everywhere else required, a place that reminded him of what things actually were when you took away everything that had been added to make them presentable. He settled his people into the lodge that first evening, reviewed Owen's patrol schedule, and went to bed early, for the first time in a week. He was crossing the main corridor toward the map room on the second morning, when he saw Clara in the kitchen doorway. She was talking to Ada Plum, the lodge cook, a broad, comfortable woman who had been feeding soldiers at this station for 11 years. Clara had her back partially turned and did not see him immediately. He saw the back of her head, the dark apron, the particular quality of stillness in the way she stood. He slowed without deciding to. Ada saw him and said something. Clara turned. They looked at each other across the corridor. Her expression moved through several things in quick succession: recognition, rapid reassessment, and then the specific look of someone who had made a careful and sensible plan and has just discovered that the plan did not account for enough variables. Damien gave her a small, brief nod. That was all. He went to the map room and spent the rest of the day with Owen and Rowan, mapping the border patrol routes and calculating response times, and drafting the preliminary version of a message to Mercer that was firm enough to be heard, and measured enough to leave room for the other side to back down without losing face. Clara served the table at dinner that evening. She was quiet and efficient, and treated him no differently than anyone else at the table. She refilled his water glass at one point, and when he said thank you, she looked at him briefly and said of course, and moved on. But the look had been different from the kitchen, different from the corridors at the main estate. Something in it had shifted, even if only slightly, toward the territory of reassessment. The second day was tense. Another report came in of movement along the western boundary section. Damien worked through the morning without stopping, going over maps and patrol schedules and the legal documentation that established the territorial lines in question. Clara appeared at intervals through the working day, with tea, with food, with things no one had specifically requested, but that the situation made useful. She did this for the whole room, for Rowan and Owen and the 2 soldiers who were also present, and she did it without drawing attention to herself. She had, he noticed, the particular skill of understanding what a room needed before the people in it had fully articulated it to themselves. In the afternoon, when there was a brief break in the session, she appeared with a cup that she set on the table near his elbow, and was already turning to go when he said, "Thank you." She stopped. She looked at him. "Of course," she said, and went out. But this time, the look lasted a fraction of a second longer. By the 4th day, the border situation had stabilized enough that Owen had it managed. Damien had the evenings. He had not had real evenings. Unscheduled time with no specific demand on it, in longer than he could clearly remember. He sat on the rear porch of the lodge the first free evening, in the cold air, looking at the dark tree line, and felt something that took him a moment to identify: the specific sensation of having nothing that required a response right now. Clara came out sometime later. She had a cloth and a crate of bread she was wrapping for Ada's morning stores. She came through the door with the crate and then stopped when she saw him in the chair near the wall. "I can go inside," she said. "You don't need to," he said. She looked at him for a moment, with the careful, measuring look she had. Then she sat on the step with the crate and went back to the wrapping. He let the silence stay. He was used to silence being uncomfortable. At the estate, silence meant someone was waiting for something, or avoiding something, and it carried the specific weight of unsaid things. Here it felt like something else. Two people in the same space, each doing what they were doing, with no pressure from either side. After a while she said, without looking up, "How long will you be here, do you think?" "At least another week, possibly longer, depending on Mercer's next move." She nodded. She kept working. "The soldiers here are different from the estate staff," she said. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Less performing," she said. Then, "Sorry, that was probably not a careful thing to say." "It was honest," he said. "Honest is better than careful. Most of the time." She glanced at him. It was a brief glance, but it had something in it that had not been there in the corridor at the estate. Something that was not quite willingness, but was at least the beginning of considering it. "You said something honest to me at the estate," he said, "in the corridor, about the gap between our positions, about why it couldn't be managed by intention alone." She was quiet. "You were right," he said. "I thought about it for a long time. Everything you said was accurate." She set down the cloth she was holding and looked at the crate. "Then I'm not sure what you're telling me." "I'm not telling you anything specific," he said. "I'm telling you that I heard it. That it affected how I think about the situation." She was still for a moment, then she stood and picked up the crate. She went to the door and held it with one hand and looked back at him. "You are different here than at the estate," she said. "I know," he said. She held the look for a moment, not the careful, guarded look she had been using, something closer to honest curiosity. Then she went inside. He sat on the porch until the cold got serious, and then he went in too. He had not known, before 2 weeks ago, what it felt like to sit with someone in silence, and feel the silence as full rather than empty. He was beginning to understand that this was not a quality of the silence. It was a quality of the person. He lay down that night and thought about what he wanted and what it was going to cost him, and went to sleep, with both things clear in his mind. By the 6th day at the lodge, Damien and Clara had spoken on the rear porch every evening, not always for long, not always about anything that would have looked significant from outside the conversation. But each evening, the conversation was a little less careful on her side, and a little more real on both sides, and the distance between them changed its character. Not smaller, exactly, but different. No longer the distance of two people who are trying not to come too close. Something more like the distance between two people who have not yet decided whether to close it, but have stopped pretending the question isn't there. He learned things about her, not by asking direct questions but by listening to what she said when the conversation ran past the surface. He learned that she had taught herself to read from a single book that had come with a supply delivery to the first settlement she worked in, a natural history of the Northern Territories that she had read so many times, she had passages of it memorized without intending to. He learned that she made decisions about difficult situations the way she made decisions about everything else, by looking at all the pieces clearly, and deciding what was manageable, and what needed to be let go. He learned that she had a sense of humor that was dry and observational, and came out most when she was most comfortable, which she was not always, but which appeared more often as the days at the lodge went on. He also learned, by watching rather than asking, that she was good at her work in a way that went beyond efficiency. When a boundary messenger arrived at the lodge exhausted and clearly unwell on the 4th evening, it was Clara who appeared first, with hot food and a dry blanket, and a cup of something that she said matter-of-factly would help with the cold coming on. The messenger looked at her with the particular gratitude of someone who has not been cared for in a while, and was not expecting to be. She accepted it with a small nod, and went back to the kitchen, and did not make an event of any of it. Owen, watching from the doorway, said nothing, but he filed it alongside the other things he had noticed over the past week, and the total of all those things was not inconsiderable. On the 7th evening, a light snow started falling, just as Damien came out to the porch. Clara was already there, not with the herbs this time, just sitting on the step with a mug, and watching the first flakes come down in the lamplight. "I have a question," she said, not looking at him. "Ask it," he said. "Why are you doing this?" She paused. "The porch. The conversations. I understand you are here for the border situation, and I understand we are in a small building, and there are limited places to be in the evenings. But you could be inside with Rowan, or the soldiers. You choose to be here." She paused again. "I am asking why." He sat down. He did not rush the answer. "Because I am more myself here than in most places," he said, "and I am more myself in this specific part of here, than in most parts of it. She looked at the falling snow. That is an honest answer. I tend toward those when I'm out here, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, so do I, she said, and meant it as what it was. A small opening. A small acknowledgement that the porch had become something real for her as well. He did not push past it. He let it be exactly what it was. They sat together for another half hour as the snow came down, and the lamplight caught the flakes, and the lodge was warm behind them, and the territory spread dark and quiet below, and neither of them said very much, and everything that needed to be understood between them was being understood without language. On the 8th day, a different kind of problem arrived at the lodge. A family from the nearest village, 3 children, 2 adults, the husband of the family having sustained a deep cut on his forearm from a farming accident, came to the station asking for help. The lodge had no physician, but it had supplies, and Owen was the kind of man who had learned field care out of necessity, and taught it to everyone he worked with. Clara was in the kitchen when they arrived. She came out into the main corridor, because Ada had heard the commotion, and sent her to see what was needed. She looked at the situation, the man sitting against the wall with his arm wrapped in a cloth that was doing less than it needed to, the children standing close together, with the specific stillness of children who are frightened and are being brave about it, the wife trying to manage everyone at once, and she went directly to the supply room without being asked, and came back with what was needed. She helped Owen. She handed him things at the right moment. She spoke to the children while Owen worked, not about anything important, just the quiet, level voice of someone who is comfortable with them, and is giving them something to look at and listen to that is not the injury. The youngest one, a girl of about 5, eventually leaned against Clara's arm, while Owen finished the work, and Clara let her. When the family left an hour later, the man's arm properly dressed, and the children each given something from Ada's kitchen, Damien was standing in the doorway of the side room where he had been watching. Clara came back down the corridor. She had the look of someone who has just done something that required their full attention, and whose attention has now released. She was not performing the satisfaction of having helped. She was just returning to her afternoon. She stopped when she saw him standing in the doorway. She waited. "That was well done," he said. She looked at him. "They needed help," she said simply. Owen knew the medical part. I knew the children part. She paused. Ada knew the food part. All 3 parts were necessary. "Yes," she said. "They usually are." She went back to the kitchen. He stood in the doorway for a moment after she was gone. Owen came up behind him. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "She's not like most people." "No," Damien said. "Most people, when they help, have a look about them afterward, like they want the helping to be noticed." Owen paused. "She just went back to the kitchen." "Yes," Damien said. "She did." Owen went back to his work. Damien went back to his work, but the afternoon had a different quality to it, a clarifying quality, and by the time evening came and he was on the porch and Clara came out and sat on the step, he was more clear about what he was doing here than he had been about most things in a long time. It was the 5th evening at the border lodge, and the rear porch had become a place that neither of them had formally claimed, but that both of them now came to in the evenings as a matter of course. Damien arrived first. He had finished the day's border work an hour earlier. Mercer's pack had sent a preliminary message that morning, walking back the boundary crossings without quite calling them boundary crossings, proposing a meeting in neutral territory the following month. It was a retreat dressed as a diplomatic overture, and everyone involved knew exactly what it was. Damien had drafted a reply with Rowan that accepted the meeting while making the territorial position absolutely clear. The immediate problem had resolved into something manageable. What remained was patience and presence. He sat in the chair near the wall and looked at the dark tree line. The sky above the pines had gone to deep blue at the top, and held a thin strip of fading orange at the ridge line, and the cold was the dry, clean cold that came in the hour before full dark in winter, the kind that settled into things rather than moving around them. Clara came out about 20 minutes later. She had a small board, and a knife, and a pile of dried herbs she was portioning into storage bundles for Ada. She sat on the step with the board on her knee, and the herbs spread beside her, and worked without looking up. After a moment she said, "The border situation is quieter." "For now," he said. She nodded. She tied a bundle. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. She looked up. "Not about the situation here. About you." He paused. What do you actually want? Not what you're working toward. Not what you're managing from day to day. What you want. She held the bundle she had just tied, and considered the question with a seriousness that told him she was not going to produce the first available answer. She was actually going to think about it. Safety, she said after a moment. A permanent posting somewhere. Somewhere I know I'll still be in a year. Where I don't have to calculate every few months whether the current situation will last or whether I need to start preparing for the next one. She looked at the herb in her hands. And a garden. A small one. I have always wanted something growing. Something that would be there when I came back to it, that didn't need to be picked up and moved. She paused. I know that is not a very grand thing to want. It doesn't sound small to me, he said. It sounds exactly like the things that matter. She glanced at him briefly. Something moved in her expression. Not quite warmth, but not the careful guardedness either. Something between. What about you? She said. He looked at the tree line. The last of the light was leaving the ridge. You asked me, she said. I'm asking the same. He was quiet for a moment. Peace, he said finally. Not quiet. I can create quiet. Something different from quiet. The feeling of being somewhere that doesn't require you to be anyone other than who you actually are. Being with someone who doesn't need you to perform at them, and doesn't perform at you. He stopped. He was aware that he was saying this more directly than he usually allowed himself to say anything, and he was saying it to this specific person, and he was aware of both of those things. I have been looking for that for a very long time. She had gone still. She was holding the board in her lap and looking at it, not at him. Do you find it? She asked. Sometimes, he said. He did not look away from the tree line. More in the last 2 weeks than I have in a long time. The porch was quiet. The cold settled around them. A bird called once from somewhere in the pines, and then was not heard again. Below the lodge, in the direction of the territory, nothing moved. Clara looked at him then. Not with caution, not with the rapid assessment she usually brought to looking at him directly. Something closer to recognition. The expression of someone who has heard something true and knows it. He held it. Let it sit between them, without trying to do anything with it. Then she looked down at the herbs. She finished the last bundle, slow and careful, and set it with the others. She gathered the board and the bundles and stood. I'm glad, she said, very quietly. She picked everything up and went inside. The door closed behind her. Damien sat alone on the porch. The cold had gone from serious to substantial, and he sat in it without moving, and let the dark come in fully around the lodge and the trees, and the lamplight came through the kitchen window in a long yellow rectangle across the porch boards, and he was more clear-headed than he had been in years. He had been confused, intermittently, since room 14, confused about what he was feeling, and what it actually meant, and whether it was something he was allowed to follow. He was not confused now. The confusion was gone, the way fog goes when the wind comes up. Not gradually, but all at once, leaving everything visible that had been obscured. He knew what this was. He knew what that room had felt like, and what these evenings felt like, and what it felt like to sit across from someone who asked the same question he had asked her, and waited for an honest answer. He knew what peace felt like because he had been sitting inside it for 2 weeks, and he knew whose company it was that made the difference. He also knew what it was going to cost him. He had known this for several days, and he had not looked away from it, because looking away from costs was not how he operated, and never had been. The council, the noble families, the alliance arrangements, the political conversations that had been in progress for months, all of which had been built around the assumption that the king would eventually choose someone whose connections made the arrangement valuable beyond the personal. Gareth's carefully maintained list, the expectations of pack lords who had come to the gathering with daughters and plans. He sat with all of this, and let it be what it was, significant, manageable, and less important than the thing he had found. He went inside eventually, and found Rowan at the correspondence desk and said, "We go back to the main estate in 3 days." Rowan looked up. "The border is stable enough? Owen can hold it from here. There's something I need to handle at the estate." Rowan looked at him for a long moment with the reading expression, the one he used when he was being given partial information, and was carefully not pointing this out. "Understood," he said, and went back to the correspondence. Damien went to his room. He lay down. He thought about a small garden in a corner that got the most morning light, and a woman who had never asked him for anything, and the hollow place in his chest that had been waiting his whole life for something real. He fell asleep. He did not dream, or if he did, the dreams were quiet and left nothing behind when he woke. Only the clear knowledge that in 3 days he was going back to the estate, and after that, whatever it cost him, nothing was going to be the same. He thought about the 11 women in 2 years, and about all the evenings that had felt like performances from start to finish, and about what it meant that none of those evenings had produced so much as a fraction of what these 2 weeks on a border lodge porch had given him. He thought about Gareth's list, and the schedule, and the idea that the right connection was something that could be arranged if you had the right parameters and the right people in the right room. He thought, the right person is not something you arrange. The right person is something you recognize. He went inside eventually, when the cold made staying unreasonable, and he found Rowan at the desk in the correspondence room. Rowan was writing. He looked up when Damien came in. The border situation, Damien said. Mercer's reply was a retreat. I agree, Rowan said. Owen can manage the monitoring from here. The message I sent this morning closes the immediate question. He set his hands in his coat pockets. We go back to the main estate in 3 days. Rowan set down his pen. He looked at Damien with the reading look, the one that processed what it was being given, and what it was not being given, and was careful about what it said based on both. Is there a specific matter at the estate that needs your attention? Yes, Damien said. Rowan waited. Damien did not expand on it. Rowan picked up his pen. I'll prepare the arrangements, he said. He said it without inflection, without the slight emphasis that would have indicated he was commenting on anything. He just said it, the way he said things when he had understood perfectly, and had decided that understanding perfectly was enough. Damien went to his room. He sat on the edge of the small bed for a moment. The room was plain and cold and quiet. He looked at the frost on the window. He thought about a woman on the porch step with dried herbs spread across her knee, and an answer to a question that was not trying to be anything other than what it was. He thought about what he was going to say when he got back to the estate. He thought about the council and Gareth and the alliance conversations, and all the things that were going to become significantly more complicated before they became simpler. He let himself think about all of it without flinching, because flinching from the cost of something was not how he made decisions. He thought, I know what I want, and I know what it costs, and the cost is worth it. He lay down. The lodge was quiet around him. The fire in the grate was burning low. He closed his eyes. He thought about a garden in the eastern corner of a field that got the most morning light. He thought about something growing. He went to sleep. In the morning he woke early, and the lodge was already stirring. Ada in the kitchen, Owen in the outer corridor with his daily patrol brief, the sound of horses being seen to in the stable yard. Damien dressed and went to the map room and spent the morning completing the border documentation with Owen so that everything was in order before they left. He was thorough. He was completely present. He addressed every open question and left nothing for Owen to handle without clear guidance. He was working, he realized, the way he had not worked in 2 years, without the specific restlessness underneath it, the low-level distraction of the hollow place that had made it difficult to be fully in any room he was in. He was fully in this room. He was fully in this work. Something had settled in him on the porch last night and had not unsettled itself overnight, and the quality of his attention this morning was different for it. Owen noticed. He said nothing about it directly. He was not a man who commented on things that were not his business to comment on. But when the morning session ended, and Damien thanked him for his work over the 2 weeks, Owen looked at him with the level, measuring look of someone who has been watching carefully and has reached a conclusion. We'll hold the line, Owen said. You take care of what needs taking care of at the estate. It was as close as Owen got to acknowledging anything that had not been stated. Damien nodded once, and that was enough. He packed his own things that afternoon. He saw Clara once. She was in the corridor with the basket, coming back from the upper storage room, and she stopped when she saw him, and he stopped when he saw her, and they were both carrying something in the look they exchanged that neither of them translated into words. He said he would see her at the estate. She said yes, she would be back there from the day after tomorrow. He nodded. She nodded. He went on, and she went on. It was the shortest exchange they had had in 2 weeks, and it was the most complete. He thought about the porch over the 5 evenings he had spent on it. He thought about the quality of those evenings. Not the content of the conversation specifically, though he remembered those too, but the quality underneath the content, the specific feeling of being in a place where the air did not ask anything of him, where the silence was not a problem to be solved, where the person across from him was not performing and did not require him to perform, because there was no audience for either of them, and no reason to be anything other than exactly what they were. He had been sitting in that quality of air for 5 evenings. He was sitting in it now, alone on the porch after she had gone inside, and it was still there, a residue of it, the warmth of it lingering in the cold air the way warmth lingers in a stone wall after the sun has moved past it. This, he thought, is what I have been looking for. Not a woman specifically, not a companion in the political sense, not someone with the right alliances, or the right family, or the right set of accomplishments. This specific quality of air, this specific way of being in a place, and being fully in it, without the surface tension of performance. This. He had found it accidentally, in a room he walked into in the dark, beside someone who was already asleep, and did not know he was there. And in the 2 weeks since, he had found it again every evening, on a porch that smelled of cold pine and lamp oil, in conversations that were honest, because there was no reason not to be honest, with someone who had told him to his face that she should not be something he was curious about, and had meant it completely. He did not know, sitting alone in the cold with this understanding settled clearly in him, exactly what came next. He knew the shape of it, knew that he was going back to the estate, knew that there was a conversation he needed to have with the council, and a conversation he needed to have with Clara, knew that both of those conversations were going to be difficult in different ways. He knew all of that. What he knew more than all of that was this: the hollow place in his chest, which had been unchanged by 8 years of good governance and 11 carefully managed evenings, had been quiet for 5 days, and the quiet was real, and it was connected to something specific. He was going to do something about it. He walked into the council chamber at 9 in the morning and sat down before anyone else had settled into their chairs. This was unusual. He typically arrived last, let the room fill around him, allowed the energy of the meeting to establish itself before he entered it. Arriving first, before Elder Gareth had finished arranging his papers, before Lord Calder had come in from whatever conversation he was always having in the corridor outside. That was the kind of thing that told experienced people something significant was coming. The room adjusted itself accordingly. People took their seats faster, set their things down with less noise, and went quiet before he had spoken a word. He waited until everyone was present. "I have made a decision about my companion," he said. The room went completely still. Elder Gareth had served 3 kings, and had been on this council long enough to have developed the ability to go very still when information arrived that required all available attention before any response was given. He went still now in the way he only went still for genuinely significant things. "Her name is Clara Voss," Damien said. "She is currently on kitchen staff posting at the Border Lodge, returning from a temporary assignment. She is Omega rank. She has no family connections within this pack, and no political alliances of any kind. She is 22 years old." He said it plainly, without preamble or softening, because there was no version of this announcement that went better with either. 4 seconds of silence. Lord Calder said, very carefully, "I need to make sure I understood that." Ida Worth, who managed the Northern Trade Alliances, said, "Is this a formal announcement?" Felix, who handled border affairs, and generally said less than anyone else at the table, looked at his hands. Gareth said nothing. He was still holding everything. "It is a notification of intention," Damien said. "I am informing the council before I speak with anyone outside this room, as a matter of courtesy and process." Lord Calder leaned forward. His voice was controlled, but not entirely comfortable. "The political implications of this are significant. The Vane family, the Croft family, and the Lindell family have all been in preliminary alliance discussions with this council. Those discussions were explicitly structured around the companion question. They will not survive this announcement. Some of those alliances may be renegotiated on their own terms," Damien said, "without the companion arrangement as their foundation. The alliances have value independent of that question. With significant time and significant effort," Calder said, "which we do not currently have in abundance. Hugh Mercer's latest movement showed us how quickly an external party can exploit internal uncertainty. If the pack lords at the gathering hear this news and interpret it as instability, The pack's stability is not contingent on my companion selection, Damien said. With respect, Gareth said, and his voice was very quiet, which in Gareth's case always meant the opposite of soft. It is more contingent on it than you are currently acknowledging. The lords who came to this gathering came with expectations that were carefully managed by this council over months. To tell them now that the king has selected an Omega kitchen worker with no family standing and no political function. She has value, Damien said. Not the kind that this council can build alliances on. Then we build alliances differently. He looked around the table steadily. The decision is made. I am not here to debate it. I am here to inform you, so that you are not caught off guard, and to work through, practically, together, how we manage what follows. That is the conversation I am asking us to have. Gareth looked at him across the table for a long time. He had learned, over 8 years, where the line was between a king who was weighing his options and a king who had settled something. He recognized the settled expression. He did not like it. He held the look for another moment, and then he said, "Tell us your thinking on the political management." The meeting ran for 2 more hours. 3 specific political concerns were raised and addressed with genuine answers. Rowan took notes on all of it. The Vane and Croft family representatives still present at the estate were spoken to that afternoon by Rowan personally, with the respect and care that the situation required, and the acknowledgement that the news was disappointing. That evening, a message arrived from Hugh Mercer. It was politely worded, and said, essentially, that he had heard interesting things from the Northern Territories, hoped the king was well, and looked forward to continued conversation about the outstanding boundary matters. Damien read it, and felt the flat irritation of watching someone make a predictable move. He drafted a reply that same evening, precise, measured, making the territorial position clear and leaving nothing ambiguous, and sent it before morning. He went to find Clara the following afternoon. She was not in the kitchen. He found her in the east corridor with the linen basket. She saw him coming and did not change direction. She walked toward him, and stopped and looked at him directly. "I've heard things from the staff," she said, "about the council meeting yesterday." "Yes," he said. "Is it true?" "Yes." She looked at her hands on the basket. When she raised her eyes again, they were bright with something she was working to hold in place. Not happiness. He had not expected happiness, not yet. Something older than happiness, the specific expression of someone who has spent years building careful walls around the things that could hurt them, and has just been handed something that requires deciding whether to open a door in those walls. "You feel sorry for me," she said. Her voice was flat and certain, the voice of someone who has found the most logical explanation for something they cannot quite believe. "You know about the outer lodge, the wages, the postings, being moved around for 6 years with nothing stable. You feel sorry for me, and you are giving it a different name." "I don't feel sorry for you," he said. "I don't want to be a project," she said, quietly, without drama. "I don't want someone to decide to fix something and call it something else. I know what I am, and I know what you are, and the only thing that crosses the distance between those two things is something real," he said. She stopped. "I know the distance is there," he said. "I'm not pretending it isn't, and I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to look at what I'm telling you, instead of deciding in advance what it must be. You know the difference between pity and something else. You have lived around enough of both to know it. I'm asking you to use that knowledge here." She was quiet. The corridor was empty around them, and the light from the side window was the low winter light of late afternoon. "I need time," she said at last. "I know. And I won't pretend to feel something I don't," she said. "Not for you, not for the council, not for anyone who is watching. I would not want you to," he said. "Not under any circumstances." She looked at him for a long moment. Something was working in her. Not softening exactly, but moving. "Then I will think about it," she said. He nodded. "That is more than enough," he said, and meant it, and went back to his work. He did not push for an answer. He did not send formal requests or dramatic declarations. He sent small things instead. A note asking about something she had said during one of the porch evenings. A question about whether the border lodge kitchen stored the winter herbs differently than the outer lodge had. Simple, real things, written in the same voice he used when he was simply himself and not performing at anything. He came to the kitchen in the mornings, and sometimes they talked, and sometimes they did not. And he was exactly what he had been on the porch, the same person in the same register, regardless of whether anyone was watching. He handled Mercer, who sent 2 more messages in the following weeks, both of them testing the edges of the previous reply. He handled Gareth, who came to his office 3 times in 10 days with increasingly specific questions that were all variations of the same underlying concern. He handled Calder, who was working his way toward a position and had not reached it yet. He managed all of it steadily, and without the specific restlessness that had made him difficult to work with in the previous 2 years. 3 weeks after the corridor conversation, Lena Marsh appeared at Rowan's office door. She handed Rowan a folded note without saying anything except that Clara had asked her to bring it. Rowan opened it. He read it. He folded it with the same care with which she had written it. He found Damien in the East Wing, 20 minutes later, and held it out. Damien unfolded it. 4 words, in plain, careful handwriting. I believe him. Clara. He read it twice. He set both hands flat on the desk and looked at the wood grain, and was quiet for a moment. That was longer than it appeared from the outside. Lena said she wept when she wrote it, Rowan said. She said Clara was more frightened of believing it than not believing it, because believing it meant she had something that could be taken away. Damien looked at the page. I know, he said. That is the thing I want you to carry, Rowan said. I will carry it, Damien said. He folded the note carefully. He put it in the inside pocket of his coat, close to him. Begin the documentation. Rowan nodded once. He went to begin it. In the days following the council announcement, the estate moved with a particular kind of energy. Not chaotic, but charged, the way air feels before a significant weather event. People were careful with what they said in corridors. The senior staff adjusted themselves to the new information in the way experienced people adjust to new information. Outwardly composed, inwardly recalibrating. Clara noticed all of it, because she noticed everything. She noticed the way certain people looked at her differently now, not all of them badly, but differently, with a new attention that had not been there before. She noticed the way Lena stayed close in the mornings, not because anything had changed in the work, but because Lena was protective and wanted to be nearby. She noticed the way she herself felt when she walked into rooms now, not exactly afraid, but aware that she had become something visible, which was the thing she had spent 6 years being careful not to become. She was handling it. She was good at handling difficult things. But handling something and being untouched by it were not the same, and she was honest enough with herself to know the difference. The 3 weeks after the council announcement were the most internally complicated of her adult life. Not because of external difficulty. The work continued, the estate continued, nothing catastrophic happened. But internally, she was navigating something she did not have a map for. She had built her entire life out of the principle of not counting on things, not attaching too firmly to any posting, any person, any situation that could change. She had been good at this. It had kept her functional through 6 years of impermanence. And now she was being asked to count on something, to attach, to believe that the most improbable situation her life had ever produced was actually real, was actually going to hold, was actually worth being frightened of losing. She thought about it constantly. She thought about it while she worked, while she ate, while she lay awake in the early mornings before the kitchen shift began. She thought about the porch at the border lodge, about conversations that had not been performed, about a man who had asked her what she wanted and had listened to the actual answer without trying to reframe it into something more convenient, about the specific quality of being looked at by someone who was not looking at what you could offer them, but simply at you. She thought, this is either what I think it is, or it is the most elaborate thing I have ever been wrong about. She could not find, examining it as carefully as she examined everything, a flaw in what she had observed. She could not find the performance. She could not find the calculation. She had been looking for it from the beginning. From room 14 onward, she had been looking for the point at which the authentic thing became an arranged thing, because she had learned that everything arranged eventually reveals itself. She had been watching for 2 months. She had not found it. One evening in the 3rd week, she sat at the small table in the staff room she had been moved to. Better quarters now, because things had changed, whether she had asked for them to change or not. And she took out the sheet of paper that Lena had brought her the week before. A note from the estate administration about the formal next steps in the companion process. She read it 3 times. Then she got out her own piece of paper. She sat with it for a long time. Then she wrote 4 words, carefully, in the cleanest handwriting she had. She folded the note. She gave it to Lena. She sat for a while after Lena left, and felt the specific fear of someone who has just done the most terrifying thing available to them, which was to tell the truth about what they felt. Then she got up and went to start the evening service, because the kitchen did not stop for feelings, and she had work to do, and some things were best processed in motion. Damien handled Gareth the way he handled all the things that needed handling. Steadily, without drama, with the full attention of someone who understands that the people in front of him have legitimate concerns, and the concerns deserve to be taken seriously even when the answer to them does not change. He handled Mercer, who sent 2 more messages in the 3rd week, both of them testing the boundaries of the previous reply, in the way that a cautious predator tests a perimeter before deciding not to cross it. Both messages received precise, measured responses that made the pack's position clear and left no opening for misinterpretation. Mercer did not send a 3rd message. He handled Calder, who was moving toward a position and had not quite reached it. He handled Ida Worth, who had questions about the Northern Trade Alliance that were legitimate and deserved specific answers. He handled the pack lords who had attended the gathering and were now back in their own territories, receiving whatever version of the news had reached them and forming whatever interpretation they were going to form. He did all of this steadily, fully present, without the specific restlessness that had been underneath so much of his work for the past 2 years. The restlessness that had made certain meetings harder to sit through, certain decisions slower to settle, certain nights longer than they needed to be. The restlessness was gone. Something in him had stopped searching, and the stopping had freed up a quality of attention that he had not realized he'd been spending on the search. Gareth noticed this. He did not say so, but Damien caught him, once, at the end of a council session, looking at him with the particular measuring expression of someone who has just updated a calculation. Clara noticed too, in her own way. She did not say so. But in the 3 weeks after the corridor conversation, in the small interactions that happened in the kitchen and the corridors and the service areas, something in her manner shifted incrementally, day by day, away from the careful, guarded composure she had been maintaining, and towards something that was still composed, but differently so. Not the composure of someone protecting themselves, but the composure of someone who has decided to be where they are. He noticed this. He said nothing about it. He kept sending the small, honest notes and coming to the kitchen in the mornings, and being the same person he had been on the porch, every day, without variation. The consistency was not calculation. It was simply what he was. But he understood, in the way he understood most things, that consistency over time was the only evidence that meant anything. And then Lena had appeared at Rowan's door with the folded note. And Damien had unfolded it, and read 4 words, and the thing that had been waiting to close had closed. The morning was gray and still, the kind of gray that belongs to late winter in high country. Not cold enough to be harsh, not warm enough to promise anything. Just the flat, clean gray of a sky that has not yet decided. Lena had been in Clara's room since before dawn. She had brought Clara's best things, not fine, by any standard applied in the main estate's formal halls, but clean, and well kept, and entirely her own. She had laid them out on the chair, and then spent 20 minutes finding fault with the way she had laid them, which Clara understood was less about the clothes, and more about Lena needing something to do with her hands. "You need to eat something," Lena said. She was sitting on the edge of the small table with her arms around herself, watching Clara with the specific, loving worry of someone who cannot help and knows it. "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since last night." "Lena." I know. Lena looked at the window. The frost was still on the outer glass. "Are you all right?" Clara sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about the question seriously, before she answered it, the way she thought about all questions. "I am frightened," she said. "Of the ceremony?" "No, of after." She looked at the window. "I have spent 6 years learning how to build a life out of small, manageable pieces. I know how to do that. I know how to make something stable out of limited materials, and how to protect it, and how to let go of it when it ends." She paused. "This is not a small piece. This is enormous. And I don't have a structure for enormous." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Maybe you don't need a structure yet. Maybe you just need to walk through the door and let what comes next be what it is. Clara looked at her. That is not the most practically useful advice. I know, Lena said, but it's what I have. Clara almost smiled. Almost. She stood and began to get ready. Across the lodge, in the room he had been given for the 2 weeks of the border posting, Damien had been dressed since before 5. He stood at the window and looked at the territory below. The long fields, the tree line, the ridge where the first gray light was beginning to separate sky from stone. He was not experiencing nerves in the ordinary sense. He had spoken in front of full council sessions and foreign delegations, and pack gatherings of several hundred people, and what he felt before those things was something useful, a sharpening of attention, a gathering of resources. That was not what this was. This was something older than nerves, the feeling of standing at a threshold that, once crossed, changes the shape of everything behind it, the specific weight of a moment you have been building toward, without being sure you were allowed to build toward it. He thought about Lady Priscilla Vane walking down the corridor with her chin up and her face composed, and Lady Helena Croft's genuinely warm and beautifully managed smile, and 11 evenings at tables where 2 people performed at each other, with the best intentions available, and nothing closed. He thought about the hollow place in his chest, and how long it had been there, and what it had and hadn't responded to. He thought about a narrow bed in a small room that smelled of pine and warmth, and the most complete sleep he'd had in years, and waking up to find a frightened kitchen worker being more honest with him in 3 minutes than most people managed in 3 hours. He thought, this is what it looks like when something closes. He saw Clara through the window. She had come out onto the rear porch earlier than expected, with a mug in both hands, looking out at the tree line. The cold was serious, but she stood in it without hunching, with the same quality of presence she always had, fully where she was, not reaching ahead or looking back. She was wearing her good clothes. Her hair was done with more care than usual. She looked like herself, which was the thing he had noticed from the very beginning, and had not been able to stop noticing. She looked completely and entirely like herself, without adjustment for the occasion. As he watched, she tilted her face toward the sky briefly, the way people do when they are checking on the weather or asking something of the air. Then she lowered her face and she laughed, suddenly, without preparation, at something he couldn't see. Possibly Lena had appeared behind her, possibly nothing at all. She laughed with her whole face, unmanaged and real, the kind of laugh that is gone in 2 seconds because it is not for anyone and does not need to last. He stopped walking. He stood at the window and watched her, and the laugh was already gone by the time he registered it fully, and she was just herself again on the porch in the gray morning, holding her mug and looking at the territory, and he stood there longer than he should have before he finally moved. The ceremony was exactly what they had agreed, small, honest, held on the rear porch of the border lodge in the cold morning light. Rowan stood at Damien's left. Owen stood at Rowan's side, with the careful, quiet expression of a man who has seen most things and is making room for this one. Ada Plum was in the kitchen doorway, which gave her a full view of the porch without requiring her to be formally present, and she was crying into a cloth from the first words onward. Samuel, the officiating elder from the nearest village, read the formal language clearly and simply. Damien and Clara stood facing each other. He had planned to say only the required words. He had told himself on the ride back from the border that he would keep it simple. Let the day be what it was without making it into a performance for even the smallest audience. But standing in front of her in the pale morning light, with the cold porch boards under their feet and the tree line dark beyond the rail and the territory spreading out behind it in the gray of early winter, he found that he had something true to say, and that saying it was not performance. I have been looking for peace for a long time, he said, quietly, close, only for her. Not quiet, something different from quiet. The feeling of being somewhere that doesn't require you to be anyone other than who you are. Being with someone who doesn't need you to perform, and doesn't perform in return. He held her gaze. I found it without planning to, in a room I wasn't supposed to be in, beside someone who had no idea I was there. And every clear thought I have had since that morning has pointed in the same direction. He paused. I'm asking you to believe that it is real, because it is. Clara looked at him. Her eyes were bright and her hands were steady. I don't come with alliances, she said. I don't come with territory, or political standing, or anything that looks useful to a king in any formal sense. I know. I come with a 6-year work record, a single bag, and a strong opinion that honesty is more important than comfort. That, he said, is the most valuable thing you could bring. Something that was genuinely, completely, unreservedly happy moved across her face. Not managed, not performed, just real. Samuel finished the words. Owen started to clap, and then glanced at Rowan, and Rowan gave a small nod, and Owen clapped properly. Ada said something celebratory from the kitchen doorway that was mostly inaudible through the cloth. They walked inside together. In the weeks that followed, the territory adjusted, slowly, in the way that real things adjust when something fundamental has changed. Not all at once, and not without difficulty, but steadily. Lord Calder came back first. He arrived at a council session in the 5th week and sat in his usual chair, and during the administrative portion of the opening, he watched Clara speak briefly to Damien before the formal session began. She had a note from Owen, something about the western supply route, something requiring a straightforward decision. She handed it to him, said something in a low voice. He read it and responded, and the exchange was over in 45 seconds. But in those 45 seconds, Calder watched the king be entirely, simply present, not holding himself in the particular way powerful people hold themselves when they are being observed, not managing anything, just two people communicating clearly about something that needed deciding. Calder had been watching Damien make decisions across this table for 3 years. He had not seen him look like that before. He thought about it for several days, and then he sent Rowan a note. The Calder alliance stands. Hugh Mercer sent one more message attempting to suggest that the king's companion choice reflected poorly on his judgment, and offered an opening for broader discussion about territorial arrangements. The 3-pack lords to whom he sent it forwarded it independently to Rowan within 2 days. None of them responded to Mercer. The attempt collapsed within a week, and Mercer did not send another. Elder Gareth took the longest. He watched for 6 weeks. He watched the governance continue. Not perfectly, because governance was never perfect, but soundly, without the specific restlessness that had made Damien's attention difficult to hold on certain matters in the previous 2 years. He watched the political challenges that followed the announcement be managed with competence and with less disruption than he had predicted. He watched Clara move through the estate without pretension, doing her work, speaking honestly, performing nothing at all. He came to Damien's office in the 6th week. She is not what I would have advised, he said. I know, Damien said. She is not what any careful political advisor would have recommended. That is also true. Gareth was quiet for a moment. You are more present than you were, he said at last, and said it with the specific reluctance of someone reporting an observation they had been hoping would not become necessary. In every meeting, in every decision, fully present, in the way that matters. He paused. That has a value I did not include in my original calculations, and I am a man who dislikes incomplete calculations. I appreciate you saying so. I am not saying it for your comfort. I am saying it because it is true, and because I take my responsibilities to this pack seriously, which means accounting for variables I missed. He moved to go. He stopped. She said something to me last week. In the council corridor. I made a brief comment about the succession question. Only briefly. Not a pressure. Just a mention. She looked at me, and said that she understood the concern was genuine, that she took it seriously, and that she would not pretend otherwise. He paused. I have worked with 3 kings and their companions in this role over 30 years. No one has ever said anything like that to me in a corridor. That is who she is, Damien said. Yes, Gareth said quietly. I am beginning to understand that. He went out. 2 months after the ceremony, on a late afternoon, when the winter light was going gold from the west, Damien was walking through the south hall when he saw her at the window. She was standing at the tall window at the end of the hall, the one that looked over the inner territory, the long fields, the tree line, the distant ridge, both hands around a mug, looking out at the land with the quality of attention that was not thinking, but simply looking. Unhurried, entirely present. He came to stand beside her. She did not look at him right away. She looked at the field, the eastern corner, she said. Yes? It gets the most morning light. He looked at it. It did. He had not thought specifically about this before, but standing here it was obvious. The eastern corner of the field caught the morning sun before anything else in that view, and held it. I have been looking at it for a month, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Would it be possible, do you think, to put a garden there, a small one, just in that corner? He looked at the field, he looked at the corner, and the quality of the light that was even now, in late afternoon winter, catching it at a better angle than the rest. He thought about what she had said on the porch, about something growing that would be there when she came back to it. Yes, he said, I think that would be entirely possible. She looked at him then. And there it was, in the simple, clear, entirely real look of someone who has found the thing they were working toward, without quite believing they were allowed to find it, and has recognized it, and is allowing themselves to believe in it. Everything he had been looking for, and everything that had been looking for him. Rowan came through the far end of the hall. He saw them at the window. He slowed for just a moment, and on his face was the private expression of a man who has spent 6 years watching someone carry something they could not name, and has just watched them set it down. He kept walking. He went back to his desk. He picked up his correspondence and continued his work. Outside the window, the winter light went gold across the field and held. Clara was still looking at the eastern corner. Damien stood beside her, and the silence between them was the kind of silence that does not need to be filled because it is already full. The hollow place that had been in Damien Ashford since before he could remember was not hollow anymore. Not because someone had come and filled it from outside. Not because the right alliance, or the right family, or the right set of qualifications had at last been presented and accepted. Not because of any arrangement or schedule, or carefully managed evening at a formal table. Because one person had been completely, stubbornly, entirely herself, had refused to be a curiosity, had described a difficult truth without malice, had asked for time, and meant it, had wept when she wrote "I believe him," and had been more frightened of believing it than not, because believing it meant she had something she could lose. And in being exactly that, in being real, when everything around him for years had been arrangement, she had shown him what he had been looking for. Real, it turned out, was exactly that. He stood beside her in the quiet light, looking at the corner of the field where something would grow in the spring, and the gold light came across the territory and lay across the glass, and neither of them said anything else, and the silence was exactly as full as it needed to be, which was completely. She looked at the corner of the field for a long time. He stood beside her and did not hurry her. "In the spring," she said, eventually. "In the spring," he agreed. She looked at him. There was something in the look that was not the measured, careful look she had been using since room 14. Not the look that assessed and calculated and protected. This was something unguarded. Something that had come to a decision to stop guarding itself, which is a different thing from simply being open. You have to go through the guarding to get to the other side of it. And she had gone through it. "I want to grow something that's difficult," she said. "Not easy things. I want to try for something that takes real work and real time." "What specifically?" She thought about it. "Winter squash," she said. "And lavender. The kind that takes 2 years before it blooms properly." He looked at the corner of the field where she was looking. He thought about 2 years. He thought about something growing slowly in good soil in a corner that got the right light, taking its time, becoming what it was going to be, without being hurried. "That sounds right," he said. She looked at him once more, briefly, and then looked back at the field, and the gold light came across the glass, and they were both quiet, and it was the right kind of quiet, the kind that meant everything had been said that needed saying, and everything else was simply being together in the same place. Rowan, at his desk in the far room, set down his correspondence. He did not often allow himself to sit without purpose. He sat now, for just a moment, and was quiet. 6 years, he thought. 6 years of watching a capable, serious, fundamentally decent man move through an excellent life with a hollow place in the middle of it, and not be able to name what was missing, and not be satisfied by anything that was offered to fill it. And then a night in a room that smelled of pine, and a morning when everything was different, and 2 weeks on a border lodge porch, and 4 words in a woman's careful handwriting. He had not expected it to look like this. He had expected something more arranged, more legible, more along the lines of what he had been preparing for 2 years. He had not expected a key found on a corridor floor in the middle of a snowstorm to be the thing that set everything in motion. But he had learned, in 6 years of serving this particular king, that the things that finally settled something often looked nothing like what you had been preparing for. He picked up his correspondence. He went back to work. At the window, Clara was still looking at the field. The hollow place that had been in Damien Ashford since before he could remember was not hollow anymore. Not because someone had come and filled it from the outside. Not because the right credentials or the right family or the right performance across a formal table had finally been found and checked off a list. Because one person had looked at an impossible gap and described it honestly, had asked for time and meant it, had written 4 words when she was ready and wept while she wrote them, and been more frightened of believing than not believing, because believing meant she had something she could lose. And in being all of that, completely and stubbornly and quietly herself, with nothing performed and nothing arranged, she had shown him what real felt like. Real, it turned out, was not arranged. It was not scheduled. It was not found in a room prepared for the purpose. It was found in a corridor at 7:38 in the morning, and on a porch in the cold, and at a window in the gold afternoon light of late winter, looking at a corner of a field where something was going to grow in the spring, slowly, taking its time. It was this. It was exactly and only this. He stood beside her in the quiet light, and the silence between them was complete and full, and needed nothing added to it. And the territory stretched out below the window in the last of the afternoon gold, and the field waited in the stillness, and somewhere in the east corner of it, underneath the frost, something was already beginning,